Hey everyone, it's Alan Schimmel. You're watching TechStrong TV. Today's Tuesday, May 5th, and welcome to our show. Well, kicked off the week yesterday. It's a week 6 for us at TechStrong TV. And the show, we've settled into some patterns here, but I just feel like it's getting better and better. We've got a good show lined up for you today. Before I tell you about it, just quick reminders. TechStrong Con, our big conference, on the same themes as TechStrong TV, is scheduled for June 4th. We're announcing another round of main stage speakers as well as our secondary auditorium speakers. And stay tuned for that. You can get more info. You can register. It's free at techstrongcon.com. Also, you can follow along our daily broadcast with live chat off of the techstrong.tv website. Of course, you can watch TechStrong TV on Digital Anarchist, Facebook Live, digitalanarchist.com, LinkedIn Live, on our DevOps Security Boulevard Container Journal sites, on our mobile DevOps.com mobile app, as well as our DevOps.com apps on Roku, Apple TV, and Amazon Fire. Also want to mention we have the companion Slack channel at techstrongtv.slack.com. You can get an invite for that off of the techstrong.tv website as well. So lots of ways of watching the show. Doesn't make a difference which one, frankly, as long as you get to see some of the good content we're pumping out here. For today's show, we've got a couple of good things. First, we're going to have a good conversation I had with Alexander Yamaplowski, CEO of Security Compass, and Joel Wallenstrom, CEO of Wicker, and we're going to look at the election security for the 2020 Democratic presidential primaries, which for the most part already happened, or now they're all by mail, of course, whatever's left. And then we're going to take a look at election security in general and what we might expect in November. And it's going to be wild, as you can imagine. But I think we had a good talk with Alex and Joel, and let's see I think you'll be interested in what they have to say. Next, we had a good conversation with Stephen Gavi of Ground Labs. Stephen is co-founder of Ground Labs, and Ground Labs is all about data discovery and data security. And, in their view of the world, data discovery is the key to data security. So we'll have that. And then, today is Tuesday, and Tuesdays on TechStrong TV means our friend John Willis is here. And John has a great conversation this week, and I think you're going to enjoy it. And then from John, we will go over to the news. We'll then head over to Charlene O'Hanlon, who has 2 good interviews lined up. The Analyst Corner with Mitch. Mitchell Ashley has both an analyst commentary and video that he's done with App Dynamics. And then I'll be back for closing remarks. So it's the usual, about 2 hours, maybe 2 hours and 20 minutes worth of great content today. And we're going to take a quick commercial break, and we'll be right back. You're watching TechStrong TV.
Tech is strong. We may be working from home, but tech goes on. Tech will continue to collaborate. Tech will continue to communicate. Tech is strong. Join us for TechStrong Con, June 4th, 12 hours strong, Tech Strong. Featuring John Bacigalupe Willis, Shannon Leitz, William Hurley, Jasmine James, Kat Swatell, Cornelia Davis, James Wickett, Courtney Kistler, Damon Edwards. Live Q&A with speakers, exhibit halls, and more. Free, but register before spots fill at techstrongcon.com.
Okay, back here in the studio. As I mentioned, our first segment today, I got a chance to sit with 2 CEOs. One is Alexander Yamaplowski, CEO of Security Compass, and then Joel Wallenstrom, CEO of Wicker. Alex and Joel and I had a good conversation about election security. We looked at the relative security of the Democratic presidential primary candidates, during this past Democratic presidential primary season, or what we had of it before it was kind of cut short with COVID. And then we looked at what we might expect to see in the general election coming up, and what different campaigns and the political parties are doing to try to lock things down a bit and not have what we had in 2016. So it's a good conversation. Let's now go to Alex and Joel and myself talking about election security.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us for this segment on TechStrong TV. I actually have two good guests here that we're going to have a great conversation, I think, around election security and the recent Democratic primary elections and the security of that. Let me introduce you to Alexander Yamplowski, CEO, co-founder, Security Scorecard, and Joel Wallenstrom, CEO of Wicker. Gentlemen, welcome to TechStrong TV.
Pleasure to be here.
So, I don't think we've covered either one of your companies, either on DevOps.com or Security Boulevard, or that I'm aware of anyway. So, this might be a first exposure to our audience for both companies. So I'm going to ask each of you to just give me a little foundation of kind of what Security Scorecard does. We'll next go to Wicker. So, Alex, why don't you lead us off? Take a minute and a half, whatever. Give us a little background on Security Scorecard.
Sure. So my background is I've been a CISO, I've been a CTO, I worked at various type of companies like Goldman Sachs, Oracle, Microsoft, before I started Security Scorecard in 2014. And the impetus for me starting Security Scorecard was a realization that there's a huge problem out there. As the market is moving to the cloud, we'll become interconnected with each other. And companies have no visibility, they have zero insight into security of other companies that they do business with. So the idea that we had is just like, you can drive in a neighborhood and you observe graffiti and broken windows of houses in a neighborhood, and you can make judgments and inferences about the type of neighborhood you're in. We do the same for cybersecurity. So we pick up millions of different type of signals from outside, non-intrusively, and then we reduce those signals to a score, just like a credit score, but a cybersecurity score that represents likelihood of a company suffering a data breach. And in the past 6.5 years that we started, we used by over 1,200 customers to make insurance underwriting decisions, to report to the board on their cybersecurity, to hold accountable other vendors that they do business with. And that's basically what we do. We security scores for companies out there.
Fantastic, and a much needed service, I'll add as well. Joel, how about Wicker?
Well, one of our customers put it pretty bluntly the other day when he said that if Slack and Zoom had a security baby, you'd end up with Wicker. And so that's ultimately what we built here. The thing that makes us very different than most other tools is we're end-to-end encrypted. And while most of the things are built with client-to-server encryption, and all that really means is that we as the service provider have, it's mathematically certain that we cannot access any of the communications or data that's transmitted across our system. And so you eliminate that big man-in-the-middle attack in security vernacular from the entire equation. And so, to Alexander's point, the reason that there's so much telemetry on all these problems out there is because, it's really hard to manage and configure everything perfectly and keep it secure, and there's a lot of problems out there. And so we just try and make a very simple product that is, by definition, mathematically secure. What's really different is there are consumer products out there that do end-to-end encryption, but what we built is an enterprise product. So you have the ability to provision at scale to tens of thousands of users and control it by hooking into SSO or, Active Directory, however an organization might distribute software. And we built compliance capabilities. It's really the next generation of end-to-end encrypted communications for the enterprise, as opposed to having all these consumer products used by the enterprise for secure communications.
Excellent. And God knows we need that these days with everyone remote. But
I'll say it's busy.
well, yeah, if we have time, we'll come back to the present situation. But guys, the reason I invited you on, and I know we've been trying to get this scheduled, is we were going to have a discussion around election security. And yes, the election coming up in November and COVID and how this is going to play out with our election security, with all the other things out there, is a great topic. But let's first start, which is what I think you guys kind of worked on, is security around the recent Democratic primaries. Right? There wasn't much. A lot of states didn't even have Republican primaries. As it turned out, a lot of states didn't really have Democratic primaries either. That, worked out where they didn't have to do it, and luckily with this medical situation. But overall, Alex, I'm going to ask you to kind of kick it off here. What are you thinking? What are your findings? What can you share with our audience?
Sure. So every single day, we collect millions of different type of signals on companies and organizations out there. And every single year, we were doing a report on cybersecurity of different type of campaigns and organizations. So we've recently published a 2020 Security Scorecard political report. What we discovered is that if you look at the cybersecurity of Democratic candidates, overall, their cybersecurity has been positive. We've seen improvements compared to a year ago in terms of political campaigns taking cybersecurity more seriously, putting more thought ahead of time to make sure that their campaigns have less likelihood to get hacked. So if you compare to 2019, about a year ago, the average score for DNC was a C letter grade. Fast forward into today, into 2020, and almost all of candidates' campaigns were rated a B, so a letter grade above. We've seen good improvement. So overall, there was good willingness to commit to good cyber hygiene. We've also seen each of the campaigns utilize a number of third parties for critical functions. For example, we saw campaigns using certain type of e-commerce platforms to offer merchandise about the campaign to people who are voting, who want to vote for that particular candidate. We've seen third-party services used to host websites of those campaigns, and that created additional interest and risks. So, for example, even though overall we felt that the cybersecurity was adequate, to give an example, we observed that in Andrew Yang's political campaign, they used a community event management application that had a cross-site scripting vulnerability. I mean, since then, Andrew Yang dropped out of the race, but at the same time, we've observed certain type of vulnerabilities out there in the campaigns of different type of candidates.
Yeah. Joel?
Yeah, well, so, my personal perspective on this is that the thing that led me to Wicker was actually on the tail end of the 2016 elections, because, obviously there were a lot of issues there. And it was really, this idea of taking a consumer product and building something that could be used at scale was, in a lot of ways, sort of founded in the construct of election security. So we've been around, in 2018, like 70% of the senatorial campaigns used us. And so I've been able to watch that transformation Alexander's talking about a lot, where there are more resources being placed on election security. And I think one of the things that could probably, I don't mean bias in a negative way, Alexander, but impact that score is that there are fewer campaigns and there are more resources going to a fewer number of campaigns. They tend to always be, I don't know if it's reticent to invest in security, but these are really spectacularly competitive organizations that have to win. And if they don't win, they go away. They have a finish line. And so to pull a dollar away from advertising to go to anything is a very hard task. And so I think, really when I read the security scorecard piece, it just showed me that willingness to look towards security and invest earlier is different in this cycle than it has been in the past. And this has been, in terms of investment, I'm talking about two-factor. I'm talking about, some very, very, very basic security 101 investments that are being made earlier in the process, which is incredibly important.
Well, guys, I'm going to tell you something. I've been in cybersecurity 25 years myself. I wasn't always on this side of the camera. And I always told my VPs of sales and everything that a hacked organization was our best customer, right? Because it was always after they had a security incident that people get religion, right? And get serious about, to Joel, to your point about spending hard-earned and precious dollars on security. And certainly if 2016 wasn't enough to get anyone serious about security, I don't know what would be, right? So I don't think any candidate wants to be the next headline, right? And just like in the real world, security is becoming more and more of a priority for these organizations. I mean, it was pretty serious. To the point, though, there were presidential election cycles, and then there were 2017 kind of off-year cycles and so forth. And so I wonder if there's and maybe you guys saw it with this 2020 presidential, primary season. The stakes are higher, so therefore the spend and the awareness around security is higher than perhaps it would have been even in the 2018 congressional cycle, right? Than here in the 2020 presidential. Thoughts on that?
Well, I'll jump on that real quick. Our experience on this that I think relates to the last term, bit of information
Cycle.
is that we saw people onboarding onto our product before they had announced their campaigns. And so when people were in exploratory mode, they were starting to do some, certainly, as we all know, there's an organization that is running a campaign before it's actually a campaign, when they're exploring and they're trying to understand and they're building out the core of their infrastructure of their team. And so, Wicker Pro was used pre-announcement. So that just signals that people were thinking about security long before they had in previous cycles. And we weren't the only investment they were making in security, but people were investing in security before, people knew that they were for sure running. So like we know in the enterprise, you can't just slap on security. It's a holistic process. It's a plan. You have to have a strategy and you have to execute against that strategy. So the real positive thing about election security, and I think it's important to distinguish between the security of a campaign and the security of casting votes. But the security of building out a campaign, people were thinking about it way earlier this election cycle than they had been previously.
I agree with Joel. I observed the same type of a behavior. I think a lot of the candidates also see cybersecurity these days not just as a necessity, but also as a competitive differentiator for their campaigns as information is becoming digitized. I know personally another entrepreneur, a CEO of a company in New York, and he left his company to go be one of the people advising one of the presidential candidates for the Democratic Party to help him keep his campaign more secure. So it also felt like a lot of the candidates recruited top talent, recruited top cybersecurity experts, entrepreneurs to really be their consiglieres early on. And we've not seen this a year ago. So I agree with what Joel said. I observed the same type of trends in the market.
Yeah, no, I think they've got to bring on the expertise. I mean, I know not many presidential candidates are cybersecurity experts, certainly. Might not be a bad thing. Yes.
Yeah, I think one other thing that's happening, you talked about, the best, target for a salesperson being a hacked organization. I think, my experience, having been in enterprise security for my career, is that that's often the case, but sometimes there's thrashing after that. And there are people who are worried and not really understand, and they don't have a plan, and they're trying to understand that. And then when you get to a sense of maturity where you have a risk-based approach towards security and you understand the things that really matter, then you have this, not only maybe a good target to sell to, but somebody who can consume things the right way and build out a holistically strong program. And I think that's, also what we're seeing. So, our product, for instance, is used for protecting those things that'll swing maybe a campaign. And so opposition research or polling data or donor information. And so what has happened with campaigns who use our product is that they've looked at their business essentially and said, what are the crown jewels? What are the things that deserve different treatment and that really need to be protected differently, because it will swing votes if it's exposed or if it's misappropriated or if it's leaked or whatever. And so that doesn't mean that they're not still using products like Zoom or using general email for other stuff, but critical workflows get treated differently. And I think that's the sign of maturity, not necessarily just reactionary, oh no, bad things happen. And so that's another good indicator that there's a strategy as opposed to just a reaction to security issues.
Sure. I don't disagree. And I think, look, we all lived through 2016 and then the emails were broken into and the email servers and what have you. But Joel, your point is well taken. There's more to data than just the emails and those communications. There's all different kinds of data that these campaigns are storing. I forgot the term where you do research based on your competitor that you may want to use against them or what have you. Right? There's a name for it. But,
opposition research.
Right. Yep. So, that kind of stuff. You don't want that getting out there or you doing research that they may use against you as Oppo. You don't want them getting it. And I think the other thing we have to realize is, who's the threat coming from here? Well, it comes from everyone from just people who want to do it because they can to, cyber terrorists, if you will, like an anonymous organization or something like that, to nation states, right? And so these are serious actors, not for this isn't for a consumer grade, kiddie games. It is real stuff. Guys, I'd like to turn now to the general election coming up in November. I'm not here to give you my political views, but anyone who knows me kind of knows my views. But I'm fully expecting things to get really, really ugly, right? I think this is going to be a nasty, nasty campaign, given the history here and our circumstances. And I think the gloves will come off from a cybersecurity perspective as well. Right? I think each camp will have surrogates or allies or unbeknownst allies, let's call them, who weigh in here. What do you think we can, and I've always believed that all we can do is manage our risk. No one could ever tell you that something's bulletproof. I don't care what anyone tells me, right? There's always something. What do you think we're in for between now and November?
So I think, I agree with you. I think that it's going to be a hotly contested election. And it's not just the candidates who care about the outcome of the election, but there's also a lot of outside people who are passionate, a lot of organizations. And so cybersecurity will play a heavy role. There's going to be continued disinformation campaigns where people are going to start using and mixing different type of facts along with the real facts and made up facts to try to spread fear, spread misinformation. I'm sure there are going to be attempts to try to steal and get sensitive information about the different campaigns to try to get an upper hand. So I think that cybersecurity will play an important role. And I think that kind of on the positive side, I think that the mindset that many campaigns have adopted is that if you rewind the clock a couple of years ago, people were thinking that I'm going to make it as difficult for hackers to get into my environment. I'm going to try to focus on robustness. I'm going to buy all kinds of security tools and pray to God that we're never going to get hacked. The mindset actually became a lot more healthy these days, where people adopted a resilience mindset where they assume that people are going to go after them. They know that people are going to try to steal information, communication, and so they prepare ahead of time. And that's the resilience mindset where you say, I assume hackers are going to get inside my campaign. I assume that the hackers are going to try to be monitoring what we're doing. How do I design my systems and my cybersecurity to make it as hard for hackers to exfiltrate information and influence things if I assume that their success is inevitable. So there's a mind shift from robustness to resilience that we've observed. And at the same time, I think the number of cybersecurity attacks will only continue to intensify between now and the November election cycle.
Excellent. I don't disagree. Joel?
Yeah, the thing that that I guess worries me a little bit about this upcoming election, I guess I should say, is that I guess a little separate from what Alex is talking about there in terms of having this resilience or robust security posture, if you will, is that in 2016 a lot of what was done is just products were built and they were misused appropriately. Like it was like in the old days of the internet when people were stealing money from eBay using affiliate scams. The engineering was solid. It was working as intended. And people just found out a way to abuse it. And I think what we saw in 16 was, Facebook was working the way it was intended to be built. It was just being misused. And so what we hadn't been doing is red teaming. When I say we, like DHS, had not been, there was not this red teaming concept of how can we look at all the tangential risks associated with the appropriate use of this technology. And I'm certain, I hope as taxpayers, I think we all hope this, that we've been doing a lot of that preparation for this election cycle. And now suddenly the entire infrastructure and how elections are going to be run has been totally flipped on its head. And we probably haven't been doing red teaming around how are we dealing with this many mail-in votes and how are we dealing with the drive-in votes. And so it would be optimistic to think that we've been thinking about all the parameters for attack associated with a pandemic-based election. And so it's just going to open up so much more opportunity.
Oh, yeah.
No doubt. This is just when we thought we were starting to get our hands around it from a security point of view, this pandemic situation.
Oh, it's such a curveball. Yeah?
Yeah. Just throws all the models out the window. Anyway, guys, I told you it was 20 minutes and it goes incredibly quick. We're well over 20 already. I need to pull the plug on this. But you know what I would like to do is, look, we haven't even gotten to the full swing of things. Maybe come August, we can have you both back on and we can talk about, well, by then we should already see some of the nastiness that we expect it to be, but we can talk about, and we'll have a better idea of how this pandemic is going to play out. Are we going to have mail-in, states, basically? It'll be interesting. But I want to thank you both for joining us. Joel Wallenstrom from Wicker, Alexander Yampowski from Security Scoreboard. Thanks very much, guys. This is Alan Schimmel. We're going to be right back here on TechStrong TV with our next guest in just a moment.
SecurityBoulevard.com is the leading resource for news, analysis, and education on challenges facing the cybersecurity industry. SecurityBoulevard.com covers all aspects of cybersecurity, including data security, DevSecOps, cloud security, application security, network security, security threats, and more. SecurityBoulevard.com has the largest selection of security content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.securityboulevard.com to learn more. SecurityBoulevard.com, home of Security Bloggers Network.
Okay, everyone, back here at the TechStrong TV studios. Our next segment features Stephen Cavey, co-founder of Ground Labs. Ground Labs, you'll hear Stephen tell their story, but suffice to say, they're all about data discovery, and data security. He's going to tell us why he thinks that's paramount and what they do. So let's head over to my conversation with Stephen Cavey of Ground Labs.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us on this segment. Happy to be joined here with Steve Cavey, co-founder and evangelist for Ground Labs. Steve, welcome to TechStrong TV.
Thank you very much, Alan. It's a pleasure to be here with you today.
Yeah. Well, you're joining us from out in Singapore.
I am live from Singapore, part of our
Yeah.
global team around the world. In the US, our team's out of Austin, Texas, and we've got guys over in Europe, a dev team here in Singapore, people in Australia, and other remote workers actually scattered around the world as part of the company.
That's the way the world is today, right? Singapore is one of my favorite places to visit. I've been there a number of times. Um, but Steve, you know what? As luck would have it, given current circumstances, having a dispersed team like this that has to kind of is used to working remotely and with people, dispersed throughout the world, probably serves you well at a time when everyone can't go to the office, right?
Yeah, certainly a portion of our long-term workforce have been remote. I mean, when you're out there looking for the best talent in the world, you can't always find them where your offices are located. So when the right person comes along, you offer them a job and give them the ability to work from home. And it worked out quite fortunate in that we, late last year, started doing work from home planning because we were thinking about the future, not thinking about a pandemic, but
Right.
we were thinking about the future and thinking about staff retention and flexibility for our team and what we need to do in the future to attract better talent and give people more flexibility in our lives. We've got a number of people who are starting young families in the business and other circumstances. And we wanted to make work from home an official thing rather than something that happened by exception or for people that we couldn't hire near one of our offices. And so we started doing practice drills and started extending that out and providing equipment and doing all the things that you need to do to get ready for work from home. And it was uncanny timing that suddenly the COVID-19 pandemic came about and we were ready. And it certainly wasn't through specific planning. It was for us a case of luck. But
Yeah.
we're doing just fine during this time. Our whole team is out there working remotely and doing well.
It proves an old adage I've told people before. It's better to be lucky than smart sometimes. But it's funny. We did a virtual event back in late January called Predict 2020. No one predicted a pandemic, by the way, though. In January, we might have had an inkling, right? But one of the keynotes was Sid Sijbrandij, the CEO of GitLab. And Sid's whole 30-minute presentation was on why working from home or working remote, whatever you'd like to call it, is the future. And he actually gave a lot of the reasons you talk about, which is unless you're some kind of unicorn monster company, the way talent is dispersed throughout the world today, if you want to really grab top talent, you're not going to talk everyone into moving to San Francisco or New York or Singapore for that matter, right? You're going to have to take people where you find them, and there's no way you're going to be able to have enough offices to go into every town and city, in the world. It's not just the country. So in the case of, GitLab, it's like 1,200 offices, right, with 1,200 people, and that is, especially for startups and as they grow, that is the model to pursue. But Steve, before we jump in to all of that, I forgot. We didn't even kind of really introduce Ground Labs and what it does and tell our audience about them. Why don't we go there first?
Let's do that, Alan. Thank you very much. So Ground Labs started 13 years ago. Actually, as you said, I'm one of the co-founders. My co-founder, Peter Duffy, started the company with me. And I was a network engineer in the payment space, and Peter was a chief architect in the antivirus pattern matching space. And he and I were having a conversation one day, and we came to the realization that at that time, this thing called PCI compliance was just starting to take off. From 2006 onwards, it came into existence. Prior to that, it was Visa and MasterCard's own separate standard. So them coming together with Amex and all those guys was a great thing because it created an nice single unified standard, and ultimately led to better security of credit card data. And at that time, I could see that there were no tools on the market that helped companies understand where all that credit card data was being stored. And yet these were companies that were calling up their security assessors to be assessed under PCI. And a lot of these companies were getting assessed and getting the green tick. And it blew me away that a lot of this was happening at that time, but it was just because there was a lack of really good tools. There are tools on the market. So we saw the opportunity to start Ground Labs. Peter coming from a high performance pattern matching background, it was a perfect technology for him to focus on. And we came out with a card data discovery product originally. It became really popular with the security assessors around the world, and organic word spread. And by 2010, we launched the first version of Enterprise Recon, which is our main product still today. And as the years evolved, we've expanded way beyond PCI now. Today, we look for over 300 types of personal data from 50 countries. So we help companies figure out how to solve and find the data relating to all different standards, including GDPR, CCPA out of California, and there's a lot of other more country-specific standards that we can help with. And it's really about creating data awareness. So the whole idea of Enterprise Recon is that you can deploy it across your whole organization, and it can scan across all of the different data sources that exist wherever it may be. So that could include things like your file servers and your email servers. It could include your enterprise databases and your big data repositories that are becoming larger and larger and larger. And the new evolving problem is naturally the cloud. Every company is syncing all their data up to a myriad of cloud providers, whether it's Office 365 or Google, or into the Amazon stack and the Azure stack, and many, many others. And this is data that could be sensitive. It could have client information in it. It could have company secrets in it. Might be employee data. We know there's been a number of hacks that have involved employees being impacted, not necessarily customers. And we basically provide a single pane of glass that enables an organization to see where all of that data is, and will give you a very clear count and say, right, we've found X million records of personal data, and here's a breakdown of where that data is. And after we've given you that view, now you can go off and you can start to do things like remediate that data. So you can remotely encrypt that data, or actually in 50% or more of the cases that we've seen, the best decision actually, once we've found data, is to delete it. The old adage in security, drop the data. If you don't need to store it, get rid of it, because there is so much redundant, obsolete data out there that you probably shouldn't be storing anymore. And we're out there helping these companies figure out where all that is across all these different platforms. It's a very multi-platform solution, and sort it out and clean it all up, so that ultimately, if someone does find their way into your network, there's not much left to steal, or nothing left to steal, which ultimately brings your risk level down.
Listening to you, I was transported back, I guess it was around 2008, 2009. I had left Still Secure, the last security company I co-founded, and started something called the CISO Group, which originally was supposed to be sort of CISO in a box, if you will. And but what it turned into was a PCI compliance tool. We actually built an online app for merchants to fill out their SAC forms, right? Most of them were Category 4 merchants, but at that time the payment processors were demanding that they fill out the SACs. And just ludicrous stuff I remember going on. But the lesson to me there was how many organizations, merchants that I spoke to that were storing credit card data that really didn't need to be storing credit card data. They were doing it just because it reminded me, because at the same time what was happening in the world back then is our logs were exponentially blowing up, right? Why were you storing all this data? Because we could. right? It was like the old story about why does a dog do what it does because it's a dog. I store, you know what I'm saying? And so we started storing all this PPI, personal data that we didn't really need.
The transaction details used to be in the URL with the card number that was used to make the payment, and then
like
they would
why?
end up
What
in a
would?
web server's log sitting on the
Yeah,
front line behind only one layer of firewalling.
yeah.
That's just
I
one
mean, you got
scenario.
to. Yeah, you know. So the good news is, as we sit here, locked down in a pandemic,
Yeah,
at least the world has gotten a little smarter about storing this kind of data, right?
it
And
certainly
and
has.
and not only storing, not storing this kind of
Yeah.
data, right? There's no need. Let's store as little as possible.
Correct. I mean, one of the last things I was working on before Ground Labs was founded was tokenization. That was just starting to take off as a hot thing. And the whole idea of outsourcing your data storage, particularly your sensitive data storage, was a very new concept, but it was something that was starting to be accepted and understood. And today it's done out of the cloud, and it's immensely popular, and people accept
Sure.
that. It's incredible that the attitude has changed. But we still see organizations out there right now, despite all of those great technologies being in existence, still having either legacy data hidden in places that have been there for 10 years or more, and they're finding out-of-band processes where credit card data or other personal data is being collected. The classic being, for example, a free text field in your CRM system. You see people taking notes, and they might be taking the payment over the phone, or a driver's license number as some ID, or some other personal sensitive field, and it's just being entered straight into a free text field, and it's being stored in a CRM platform where that particular column isn't being encrypted, and that data is building up and sitting there over time. And then they wonder why.
Time bomb.
Yep, when something goes bad, and they say we didn't know we were storing that data. And unfortunately, that's the most common thing we all hear after a compromise happens is, we didn't realize that we were storing that data, and that's because they never had the processes in place to pick it up
To
in the
even know
first
what
place.
they were. So
Yeah.
I think also the problem has evolved where I think people get that storing credit card data is a no-no, and there is certainly enough third-party vault kind of products that can take that aggravation or potential liability, as I used to call it, off your plate. I think part of the problem is people don't realize what is sensitive personally identified, PII, or other kind of data that is sensitive, whether it be medical related with HIP or, I mean, we had calls here in Florida where people are writing to the local newspapers demanding that the cities and towns give out the identities of people who have COVID or have tested positive, because they want to know if their neighbors have it or not, right? And not realizing, we're going to put that information out, right? I mean, you just, I don't think people recognize the part of it is also that this whole notion of privacy and confidential data. I think there's a whole class or subclass of consumers who don't even value, like they've brought up with no privacy or expectation of privacy is a better word.
Yeah, I think that
Right.
is changing, because
I hope so.
think about 10 years ago, 15 years ago, data breaches in the news, it wasn't newsworthy, even though it was happening everywhere. We didn't have the laws, and we didn't have the reporting mandates to publish that. And nowadays, we're so desensitized to another data breach. Yep, okay,
Right.
they've been hacked, more data out there on the market. Or the price of stolen data has probably gone down a bit because there was too much this month. But the inverse effect of that is that consumers are becoming a lot more aware about when they hand
That's
data
right.
over, that there could be consequences to that. And some people are questioning it, and some people are choosing not to give that data if there's an option not to. And people, in my view, are starting to read maybe not all the legal text, but they're taking a little bit more note of a checkbox before they just tick it. You know, and certainly when you install like a new computer and it says, you know, Microsoft wants to send data back to us, some people are now thinking consciously about that rather than not that long ago just blindly clicking yes.
Sure, make things better. So let me give you my pet peeve. So now I'm on the other side. I'm, you know, all of a sudden the rabbit's got the gun against me here. Because as a media person, right, we're collecting, and when we collect data, things I've learned
In the tech, and our audience, Steve, they're people like you, right? They're very technical, security conscious.
You know, technical people. I don't ask for phone numbers, because I don't think anyone in their right mind is going to give me their phone number. You know, I've gotten enough I81, U812. You know, it's not a good. So we don't collect phone numbers. We don't collect mailing addresses. What the hell am I going to do with them? You think I'm going to start snail mailing people? So we don't collect phone numbers. The only thing we collect is email, company name, title. That's basically it, and your name. But most recently, we've started getting, not a lot, it's a trickle, but there's some services that are being run, I guess, pursuant to GDPR and CCA, where we get this email, you know, this is an email from Hive or Mind or whatever it's called on behalf of Steve. And Steve says the last time he got an email from you was a month ago, but he wants you to remove all of his personal data from your records, pursuant to GDPR, CCA, blah, blah, blah. So, you know, we're a legitimate company. I get one of those. I send it over to my team. I say, please remove this person from our list. Now, why they couldn't just click on the unsubscribe button, which does the same thing, is beyond me. Instead, they put the onus on us to do it. But we do it. But what kind of gets my goat is then they want, and please respond to this email directly to Steve. Here's his email address, right? They give you back the email address. Please respond directly to Steve and let him know that his personal information's been removed. That's a pain in the butt.
To it, right?
Right.
Yeah.
But the other side is, now I don't delete that record of the email to Steve that says his email, that his person, and you know, your email address is a big part. It's one of the 3 things I have about you, but that's going to stay in my email, right? I'm not deleting that email because I'm going to need, in case you say I didn't send it to you, I got to be able to show you I sent it to you, right?
A business justified reason. Yeah.
So it kind of, I don't know.
This was one of the problems that was talked about over the last number of years, was people believed that there was a data tsunami coming in terms of consent management requests. So companies were worried that they were going to receive a deluge of access rights saying, tell me what data you have about me,
Right.
and you have 30 days to respond. And if you don't respond in that time frame, then I have rights to take further action against you. This is under GDPR, obviously.
Right.
And so there's been a number of new solutions come out there on the market to specifically provide workflow and automate that process for a consumer to go online, fill in a form and submit a request, and then have that request automatically handled through some workflow and allow the company sufficient time to come back. And there's been a whole industry that's spawned out of that, but it hasn't, from what I hear from my sources, that hasn't become a huge problem yet. It is a problem for certain sized organizations, usually very large ones, but what they were worried about is that that would trickle down to the next size organizations, more the medium ones. And that hasn't happened yet, but many are still expecting it to get a lot worse in the future. Yeah. Although I think at the moment people are not thinking about consent management requests.
No, not at this moment. Which we somehow went off track here, Steve. Let's bring it back on that. So at the present moment, with present circumstances, you know, Ground Labs has come out with something to try to help people during this COVID crisis. Why don't we talk about that a little bit?
Absolutely. So it's obvious this whole remote work thing has taken a lot of companies by surprise. A lot of companies were not ready. You know, we talked about Ground Labs and what we've done with remote work, and that was luck. Many organizations weren't ready for it, and they've had to implement work from home in quite a rush. And as a result, unfortunately, in many cases, not all security aspects would have been properly considered as they were implementing work from home platforms, hardware, processes, all of the above. And now a lot of companies, or particularly the IT security people, are looking back at what's now in place and saying, gee, we might have some gaps and we need to address those. And one of the gaps that we can clearly see is the data sprawl that's happening to remote endpoint devices. So you've got these devices that are either company owned or worse, an employee owned device that are being used to access company data. And if you don't have a platform in place that's capable of searching all of those endpoint devices and monitoring all of the personal and sensitive data and company data that might be ending up out there, then you don't really have a handle on the extent of the problem or the level of risk that's currently building up inside your organization. So what we decided to do was create a version of Enterprise Recon, and we've called it Enterprise Recon Now. And it's focused on helping organizations scan all the data that's out on all of your desktops and workstations, particularly out in these remote sites in employee homes. And it will let you search for all of the data types we mentioned earlier, over 300 types from 50 countries. And once we've found all of that data, we can help you clean that data up. We can help you do what we call remediation, which is deleting the data, encrypting the data, and some other options that are available. And this is on all of those different systems that are out there in your employee homes being used to access company data. And we're making that available completely free because we want to make this as easy as possible for companies to sort out this potentially unknown data problem that's existing out there as a result of going from the old normal, which was you had everybody on systems within the four walls, within your lockdown network environment, to suddenly systems everywhere, and you may not have the same levels of control that you used to have. And so we want to provide an extra layer of protection and security.
Excellent. And this is it's a 90, is it a timed 90-day free version?
Yeah, we've come up with an offering that's based on a 90-day period, no obligation, deploy the software. It starts from early May. So we're just about to tick over to the offer, and it'll be made available until and through till June, and you can sign up for it from now to then. And once you get the software, it'll run for 90 days and it'll let you do all the scanning of those different systems that you need to do. And it'll include the remediation capabilities on those endpoint systems, on those workstations, on those desktops that are in a work from home environment. And I think something worth pointing out is traditionally DLP systems, data loss prevention systems, tried to do this kind of activity. And the way those platforms were designed on DLP was that it would try and pull all that data from the endpoint back to a central server, a piece of hardware, a kit, and then do a whole bunch of data mining exercise. Enterprise Recon's very different. We designed this from the ground up, and its design actually is perfect for the work from home situation. We know there's a lot of people out there that are on less than perfect internet connections, and that unfortunately that creates the problem even further, because now people are pulling the data down first onto their laptop or their desktop and then working with it locally, and that's creating a bigger problem. The way the scan works with Enterprise Recon Now is that the scanning for the data actually happens out on the endpoint. So we don't need to pull all of the data from that endpoint back across their internet connection back to some server on the corporate network side or in the cloud. And only the bits and pieces of data that we're seeing get put into a report in a redacted form, and it gets brought back to a master server over an encrypted lightweight connection. So it's designed to run on low bandwidth and remote networks. And regardless of whether you have 25 computers or 10,000 or 100,000 endpoints, the solution can handle scale. And it's designed to minimize the amount of data transmission moving around your network. So it's not going to be yet another bandwidth hog that's slowing down those video calls and slowing down your your kids' Netflix or whatever else is going on in the household at the same time.
Got it. And there's enough of that going on. I'll leave it at that. Anyway, Steve, we're about out of time. I want to thank you for joining us. I know it's the middle of the night there in Singapore when we recorded this, so I appreciate it. Keep Singapore well for us. We will get back there one day, I hope. Not this year, maybe next.
Be here.
I'm sure you will.
Circuit breaker as well, which is what they call lockdown here in Singapore.
Yeah. Well, I hope so, and stay well.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alan.
All right, Steve Cavey, co-founder evangelist at Ground Labs here on TechStrong TV. We'll be right back with our next guest.
ContainerJournal.com is the leading online destination for centralized computing-related content. ContainerJournal.com covers all aspects of software containers, from container management, data management for containers, container security, networking for containers, to the entire container ecosystem, Kubernetes, microservices, serverless, and more. ContainerJournal.com has the largest selection of container-related news, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.containerjournal.com to learn more. ContainerJournal.com is operated by MediaOps Inc., the team behind DevOps.com, Digital Anarchist, SecurityBoulevard.com, DevOps Connect, and DevOpsDozen.com.
Hey, everyone. All right, just a second back here at the TechStrong TV studios before we head things over to John Willis. John's guest this week is Brent Salisbury, who is a principal software engineer in the office of the CTO at Red Hat and also has the Network Static blog. John and Brent have a good discussion. I think you'll find it interesting, as most of John always has great discussions. So let's head now over to our friend John Willis with Brent Salisbury.
Okay, hey, here we are again, another sort of interview, Botchka Loop style. Really pretty fun and excited to have this guest. Brent, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hey, John. Brent Salisbury. I blog at networkstatic.net. I'm on Twitter at networkstatic, and pretty much talking about at any given time all things networking or network security, network application delivery, all the crazy things in networking that have been going on over the past decade.
So one of the reasons I sometimes appear to be smart is I've surrounded myself with incredibly smart people in certain topics, and Brent is my all things network, oracle, if you will. But I'm going to embarrass you a little bit. So I used to go. I still do. It's Pacific Crest. Every summer they invite about 40 or 50 sort of industry experts to talk to. Big money market, quants, all these, sort of they pick your brain about emerging tech, and it's a fancy to do. They pick you up at the airport. And so it was I don't know, 6-7 years ago. I'm on the van ride, and there's this young guy, and he's just coding away on Clips, and he's writing Java code and all this. And he comes up for air after about an hour, and I ask him what he does, and he says, "Oh, I'm a network guy." I'm like, baloney. Network guys don't write Java code. And then he sort of explained, what was going on in the network world that I really didn't understand, and it course changed my life. But one other thing, so as a lot of the SDN players were sort of starting their big noise, Brent was running, and you can correct me here, on an NSF grant. He was running OpenFlow in production at a hospital, while other people were literally trying to get their first customer with SDN stuff. So anyway, yeah, it started our sort of friendship, our business relationship, and now you're at Red Hat. And so,
yeah, we've come back home to Red Hat, man. It's a great place to be. Yeah. So shout out to Tim Crawford, who runs Pacific Crest. If it wasn't for him, and our friend Colin McNamara, I'm not sure that.
Yes.
our paths would have crossed. And it definitely, our careers definitely took a different arc. So, you know, you're a big brother, so I certainly appreciate you, John.
So back then, right? So so you sort of enlightened me about sort of what was going on about sort of the sort of, it was software defined networking, right? And sort of what was happening was really the classic way people thought about networking. It was this sort of wave of this new idea of sort of changing, you know, the control plane, the data plane, you know, all this stuff was going on. So what was the motivation? What got you originally excited about this? What was the original motivation of sort of this new sort of era of networking, software defined networking?
Sure. So, you know, I started networking probably 20 years ago, you know, just traditional network architect position, engineer role. And what it was basically black boxes, right? So you buy boxes from Cisco, Juniper, Arista, whoever. You know, it's proprietary software running on proprietary hardware. So you get presented with traditionally these CLI APIs, and you've kind of follow their prescriptive patterns for, you know, setting up routing protocols, layer 2 protocols, layer 3 protocols, layer 4 security policies. And so that's what the internet runs on today. So some of that's changed, some of it's still the same. And kind of taking that traditional network engineer approach, you know, I think I did my CCIE in 2002. I'm not even sure people, you know, most people outside of networking know what that is anymore. But the thing is I always kind of equate it back to like networks are so intolerant of any disruption that it's hard to change. So if you've got, you know, your cluster running on the network and the network goes away, your web scale apps running on the network goes away, everything cascades quickly and fails. So how do you go get change control windows to say, I want to try this new experimental thing that it's going to change how we run our network, when you have no idea if it's necessarily going to work or not? And that's still a problem today. Is, you know, in software we can run, you know, tests, whether it's CI, unit tests, integration tests, and say, well, we've got a pretty good feeling of predictability of how this is going to run when some kind of workload gets on it. With networks, you don't, because you can't go out and buy $10 million worth of hardware to have a separate lab to test. I mean, some people do, but, you know, that's kind of reserved for hyperscale cloud providers. Most just don't have a budget to go out and do that. So that's always going to be a challenge. So this original idea of SDN was to separate a control and data plane. So data plane is basically, you can think of it as fast path. So in Linux, you have a fast path in the kernel. You can kind of think of your ASICs in hardware as that fast path. Then you've got a control plane, which has been, you know, I think networking had the first rights to control plane. Have you noticed that?
Everything now, yeah, no,
yeah, like
everything is a control data plane, and
like
You're
why are they
they're
cramped?
let the kids play. You know?
I know, right? Well, I hear control plane. I think, you know, hey, layer 3 BGP is a control plane.
That's right.
But it's it's basically the slow path. So that's, you don't necessarily want user traffic going through a slow path, but you want some kind of, you know, it's going to be where your individual fast paths talk to each other. So, you know, I think one of the bigger things that's changed over the years in networking, you know, we had these RFC defined protocols that were the control plane, and now it's like, oh, etcd will do it, or some kind of RAF distributed system.
Yeah, we can get into that near the end of this.
Yeah. Where we've gone to, where we've been. So this idea was decoupling of that software and hardware. So we should be able to say, well, I want to be able to program networks however I want to program networks, and not be constricted by how a vendor sees it being done. So the early iteration of that was things like OpenFlow. And it's basically, here's this granular way to define specific flows, L1 through L7 essentially.
And programmatically, right? The promise was a programmatically way to sort of create flow tables, which was the start of that sort of software-defined magic, if you will. Right?
Yeah. And it, you know, the lessons we learn along the way are, it's really hard to to say, you take away a lot of layers of abstraction when you're saying, I want to program every individual flow that comes across the network, because there's so many different states and potential that you can get. It's a really hard problem to solve. So with that, we started to say, okay, well, let's step back a little bit and actually focus on what the problem is. And so, that's kind of where we started our interactions, John. And it's like, we were very focused on like, by we, my friends, Madhu Venugopal and Dave Tucker, we were looking at things like OpenStack and VMs. Then comes along John, he's like, hey, there's this thing called containers, and it's going to increase the amount of hosts and the amount of nodes on the network.
No, that was, so to let everybody know that we sort of let a little bit of a cliffhanger there.
Right. I'm kind of sliding into
created a company called Socket Plane that we sold to Docker, and I remember talking to the original people over at Docker, and they had their bridge networking and all, and not me, but I brought in Brent and the Madhu Venkapali, and they're like, it was like grown-ups with kids. We were like, guys, if you think you're getting this scale, there is no way you're going to do it with bridge networking. But the I think the interesting thing was we were still in sort of the software defined camp at that point, right? Which was, so you had been working with those guys at Red Hat, actually, ironically, on OpenShift, basically trying to do Open Daylight, which was the open source software-defined networking tool. And if I remember correctly, and fix me, you all were sort of going down the path of, like, if we could do this sort of programmatic language type stuff, not only could we sort of do sort of micro segmentation, and I want to explore that, but we could break out, move sort of rigid firewalls from IP tables into these sort of programmatic OpenFlow tables, and even like going down like crazy paths, like we could segment database calls, and I think everybody was in the drink the Kool-Aid stage, but like that's how we sort of approached. I don't think we ever saw that we were going to give that level of software-defined networking for containers, but we did think like we could use that sort of control plane, data plane logic for Docker originally, because you almost had to, the scale problem that the industry was going to have, right?
Yeah, and so, fundamentally, going from like VMs to containers is, you're going to increase the amount of IP addresses and virtual network devices on your host, tenfold, right? For every one VM, you're probably going to run, let's say 10 containers for the same expense. So instead of having, 20 IP addresses on your, physical box, you're going to have, hundreds potentially. So that just creates this orders of magnitude problem. So, if we were seeing scale problems with VMs and trying to say, here's how we're going to do SDN, you're certainly going to have scale problems in a containerized world. So it's kind of the tip of the iceberg. When, the tip being exposed and the problem we're just trying to hide under the hood. When it comes to services, like, that's the value prop of networking, and that's definitely what's changed the most over the past 5 years. Like, networking used to be a differentiator. Now it's just table stakes, right? You have to have connectivity and some kind of path, isolation, path isolation, tenant isolation. So how are you going to go about that? Are you going to go about that with network constructs, in a traditional sense, and it's going to be subnets, or are you going to go this kind of Kubernetes path where, subnets are irrelevant, everything's on the same subnet, and you're just isolating these things with policy? In retrospect, obviously the latter is probably what makes the most sense, because you stop caring about kind of the details of the network, and it's the pets versus cattle thing. But at the same time, your traditional enterprise isn't built that way, right? It's all going to be zone-based policy. You're going to have a zone for database. You're going to have a zone for PCI. You're going to have a zone for, whatever special functions are part of your business, and those are, that's the golden eggs of your enterprise. You're going to isolate them.
Yeah, that's the core of sort of where I like where we wound up, right? So in fact, our first prototype, that we did with socket plane for Docker was what VMware would sort of or describe as microsegmentation, right? Where we create a zone for the proxy or HA proxy. We created a zone for a network. Basically, we were basically creating sort of virtual networks, and so the front end proxy could never talk to the database zone, and we were using Open vSwitch, right, as our sort of our mechanism to create this SDN like, and so you're saying sort of the alternative to that, sort of prior to SDN would have been sort of advanced subnetting and all these things, but it would have been very rigid, and you possibly would have had to do some forming of IP tables around to sort of create that sort of network isolation and I guess correct me if I'm sounding like an idiot, but and then and to form sort of the like you can't the security or sort of you can I don't want anybody on this network. This network will never see this network. The front end will never see the back end network, right? It's impossible to get there. Right. And so SDN was all about sort of creating these magic sort of networks that you can compose. And even when we started working, what I loved, at Compose, the actual product that Docker had, which was Compose, right? What we were able to do when we sort of got acquired by Docker, we were able to actually create sort of composable network definitions in sort of the Compose product, the YAML product. Like this is network red, this is network yellow. But that didn't last.
Well, and it kind of did. It lives on in the kind of sense of labels. So when you have a policy, so what wasn't in place was this label this policy construct. So there was like no sense of here's how the industry is going to do policy. So instead of saying a policy is tied to a network, it's a policy is just a policy, and it can be tagged onto any container running on the network. So here's where it gets really tricky, right? So let's just take your traditional enterprise. Traditional enterprise, which is people that pay for software, they're going to have a firewall, and they're going to have these various zones defined in the firewall, and it's going to be that's how traffic and path isolation is done. So you're going to have these zones that have these access lists attached to it. And each of those those access lists, typically a central point, are going to define what zone can talk to another zone. So it could be front end can talk to back end. So that's a really long access list for starters. So you've got the SecOps team that's going to say, your security team's going to say, well, any rules get applied here, they go through change control, and we control how those are applied, and we have this visibility into it. So when we say, now let's disaggregate those centralized firewalls, because there's a rationale to decentralizing firewalls. It's really a financial rationale. And that's saying, if I run all my traffic through these choke points, including east-west traffic, well, that traffic is just continuing to explode. So the cost of continuing to buy hardware for these east-west transactions that are probably happening on the same node, while I'm hairpinning them back into a firewall, that starts to get really expensive. You're talking millions of dollars for these boxes. So if I can disaggregate that policy instead of being on central boxes and push it all the way down to the node, well, now my east-west traffic can get policy without having to hairpin back up to a firewall. 10 years ago, north-south traffic going into a data center was about 95% north-south. So 95% of it would leave the data center. 5% of it would stay in the data center. That's now flipped on its head. A couple of years ago, I think Facebook was saying 97.3. I'd say that's probably the same, beyond hyperscale now, and most data centers see some kind of traffic pattern similar to 97% of the traffic is east-west, and 3% of the traffic actually leaves the data center. So while traditional firewalling makes sense for that 3% that's still leaving the data center, it stops making as much sense for all your east-west interactions, because we're taking these monolithic applications and breaking them into lots of different IP addresses.
Yeah, microservices, you know, API economies, right? All that sort of becomes expensive east-west traffic, where you know, classic sort of transactional outside, give me a record, give me it back, was a north, you know, north-south. Yeah. So
yeah, those used to be socket calls, you know, within this monolith, and now it's you know, it's all over IP, and it's huge numbers of transactions, and so for each one of those flows, pumping that through a firewall starts to get expensive. So like when you're making a case to an enterprise of why we should do this, like, you know, most of the time there needs to be an ROI associated with it. That's a pretty low-hanging fruit. The problem is you're taking the central list of firewall rules, and now you're saying, I want to disaggregate those across thousands of nodes. So if you had problems, you know, managing them on a firewall cluster where it's like one list of access lists, good luck breaking them across 1,000 nodes.
As a network guy, I mean, when I'd go into a client and I'd say, hey, you know, how can I help you with this, this, and this? They'd say, you know, John, that's all great. Help me with this, which is firewalls. I mean, firewall, just like a cesspool of firewall, you know, Saturday night, you know, massacres of somebody making a change and like, oh, we're not going to get back up by Monday morning. And like, I mean, that model, you know, whether SDN was the promised land or not, right, that model had to go. Right. And I guess, you know, SDN was at least sort of a promise. But so let's pivot to, so you know, here I am sort of, I learned everything I learned about SDN. I actually, you know, I could play an SDN expert on TV. And then, you know, at some point we sort of break out, you know, we sold the Docker, you know, we sort of, and all of a sudden I hear you talking about the SDN failure actually, or the experiment wasn't as sort of rosy as it was. What was your sort of flip there on like, all right, so we can't use the sort of, I mean, in a sense, we're still always stuck and haven't fought our way out of the original networking, the networking work that has been done for like, and I'm rambling, but I always love your quote is like BGP is why we get all the cat pictures that we love and adore. And I actually like that. So we went from like a world of sort of mess. We had a promise of a world that should unmess us. Containers then injected a level of scale that was insane. And then coming through that, you learned a lot working at Docker and trying to sort of arbitrate the classic SDN to things that were happening. And sort of you if I'm saying this right, so your mind changed a little about what networking is. So, and I'm not even talking about what you think. I want to ask you, kind of end this where you think networking is now. But as you were going through the Docker experience and you were seeing what worked and what didn't work, I noticed that you sort of had a like, what do you mean SDN isn't the greatest thing, Brent? You know, so does that make sense as a question?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so doing complexity for complexity's sake, just for change, is fun, but at the end of the day, it might not be practical. So, you know, while reinventing networking is a cool idea, there's a lot of things that just work in networking. The Linux networking stack is incredible. NetLink is incredible. There's layers of abstraction where I can just say, I need a port that's functioning, that's going to answer ARPs, and it's going to have a MAC address table, and things are just going to work. So as networking becomes more table stakes, there's probably less interesting things that should be done in the networking layer and need to be moved up the stack. So, you know, being able to instantiate low level kind of, you know, you can almost equate it to, you know, we're still building out what the ASIC is in a virtual environment. So, you know, we have to harden that ASIC first, which is, you know, Linux networking, Windows networking, whatever, kind of this fast path that needs to be solid. And then how do we interact with that? Do we do it in a more coarse fashion where it's just going to be, hey, there's a route over here and you need to know how to get to that route, And independently of that function is going to be some kind of policy mechanism, whether it's eBPF, whether it's IP tables, whether it's flows in OVS. Those things kind of need to be separated from one another. So just reachability from one side of the network to the other, one side of the cluster to the other, needs to be simplified. And then we separate policies. So I think the industry kind of started going in that direction where it's like, you know, we need a common pattern of how we do policy, because the real value is going to be firewalling, and it's going to be load balancing. I mean,
hold on there, Hoss. No, but remember, you know, one of the things that I think you guys did a great job when we got to Docker, which was, you know, let's just be clear, Solomon had some ideas about networking that we didn't all agree with, and so one of the compromise was to create a really good plugin architecture. You know, that's someday I'm going to write a book about this, but that's a generous summary of what we thought when we came into Docker and where we wound up. But I remember you created sort of on your own, once you had the plugin architecture, a Mac VLAN plugin. And I remember going to a Linux networking conference, and it was like water on a desert to some of those networking people. Right, when we showed them your Mac VLAN plugin, which I think you just described, it was at the end of the day, there was some simple things that we could have just taken advantage of. So that seemed to sort of permeate. There's a couple places I'd like to go here. One is there was a separation. Sort of Google kind of put the stake in the ground and said, we're not going to use Docker's networking. We're going to go this route. So I wouldn't mind talking a little about that. But ultimately, I think we all wound up with sort of Calico being the answer, you know, come around 2019, right? So somehow we were sort of driving these plugin architectures. Google put a stake in the ground for a lot of good reasons that, you know, we're not going to share the vision of Docker's networking. If you talk a little about that. And then at the end, and then at the end of the day, it seems like we all wound up in the same place anyway, which is sort of Calico being the sort of lingua franca for container networking. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So, I mean, there's definitely other good plugins out there, right? So there's Flannel, there's Calico, there's Cilium. There's lots of, you know, different takes at you know, how networking and containers should be done. I think we gravitated towards Calico because Swarm was dying, and we had to, you know, I don't know how much we want to get into that, but anyways, Calico won. Kubernetes won, and we need to have an existing plugin that would work for Kubernetes. Calico is very interesting because one of the things it does, it's got two kind of options. So initially it started out as being very BGP focused, which underlay focused. So we have overlays, which are going to encapsulate traffic and abstract out the network in between. So you can have two hosts on different sides of the data center, and they can look like they're directly connected via a VXLAN encapsulation or IP and IP encapsulation or Geneve. These are all just different encapsulation protocols. So while it removes the underlying network, there's also, you're abstracting away a lot of complexity and a lot of but also visibility. So traditional ops can't just jump on a router in between or a switch in between and necessarily troubleshoot what's happening. And overlays really, you know, overlays have been around a long time. We used to call them GRE tunnels. You know, GRE is just another encapsulation. But you know, in the early 2000s, like if you had a really weird problem with a remote site, you would just set up a tunnel and hide away all the nastiness. And it was kind of a bad approach then. Now, you know, with the advent of Martin Casado and who got acquired by VMware, like he initially brought kind of this idea of overlays to the data center. That's still what you know, VMware's strategy is today. So Calico's got that option to either A, do it in overlays, or B, do it with BGP and say, we're not going to encapsulate things. We're going to tie into the existing network. So if you're, you know, a really large data enterprise, you know, a lot of banks probably are more interested in it because you can directly connect to the underlying network. You're not dealing with an encapsulation and abstracting it away. The default nowadays is basically overlay, so I would probably argue overlay 1. But Calico kind of provided both of those, and that's the
That's what
direction.
we wanted to do, right? I mean, that was the whole soccer praying vision, which was, I remember meeting who's the guy that we love, Alex, from Calico, Tagira.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I remember meeting him when we were first getting started, and and it was clear to me he was just going to go underlay. They were just going to make BGP super easy to use, which again, and I was just sort of getting baptized in SDN, and I'm like, well, wait a minute, how come you're not doing SDN? How can you not do SDN? Flaying my hands, being an idiot on networking, talking to an expert in networking, and he's like patting me on the, he's a great guy, patting my head.
He's good people.
Calm down, like we see this. It's funny though, because I thought, okay, we're going to crush these guys because we're going to do both. Like our plan was we were going to do overlay, and that's what we were doing, right? The microsegmentation, but we were going to allow. Because what I had learned in working with some big banks sort of prior I met you, or after I met you, I started exploring this DevOps networking thing. And it was clear that the networking people wanted to have their fingers on the network configuration devices, the switches and the router configs. And so if you just came in with a sort of a pure abstraction tool, they'd say, okay, what about this edge case that we always have? And then, and I remember a bake-off between VMware, Nicira, which is Casado's company, and then one of those other sort of SDN players that went away. And one of the SDN players that went away had this sort of duality. And so VMware would say, yeah, we're going to have to roadmap that. It could be 6 or 8 months. And the other guys would, like, literally during the questionnaire, they'd pull up a switch configuration and they'd say, oh, yeah, here, look, we can, like with us, you can do both. So it's just interesting that that's what Calico is now, and they weren't. And I always thought that was going to be our sort of our winning, because you had, I guess the sort of the meta of all that is the traditional network people. Well, first off, you can't abstract all the things in the network, right? I mean, that's a truth, right? Like there's so much complexity there that when you get into certain use cases or edge cases, the sort of flow tables and all those things just won't work. And so then in the end of the day, you have to sort of boot back into sort of configurations. And I guess that was the truth that maybe SDN, the pure SDN model never perceived.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it's also time. I mean, it just takes a lot of time to get those things right. And so, like currently now at Red Hat, stepping back into the OVS world, Open vSwitch world, it's amazing the progress that's been made on that front. And, it's getting hardened all the way down to the data path. So there's a lot of advantages when it comes to, hardware offloading, things like that start to make a lot of sense. I think, one of the bigger changes is definitely the state is being now distributed by kind of these newer kind of distributed databases, as opposed to, in networking, we always saw it as, you've got routing protocols, you've got OSPF, ISIS, RIP, EIGRP, BGP. These are all RFCs that, when a new node pops up on one side of the network, that state gets distributed out to everybody. Now that can be done in, Raft clusters, along with, all the other functionality, storage, and everything else that's going on in there that runs your cluster.
So as sort of a novice then here, so OVS was really a nice abstraction on the sort of open flow, right? Like, which did a reasonably good job of giving us a sort of a way to sort of Open vSwitch, OVS, and then I was talking to you recently. You were talking about sort of OVN right now, which is sort of the newer. Is that right? OVN is
yeah.
But yeah. So, and the difference there is that it is actually using things like sort of distributed, RAF protocols, and so if I got this right, then it seemingly is this perfect marriage of sort of the things we've learned work really well in distributed computing. Consensus, RAP, the things that we all see in like etcd, or console, all those sort of tools that sort of built the modern cluster infrastructures. and taking the best of those, and then taking the best of what sort of Open vSwitch did for sort of enabling programmatic of network sort of flow, right? Is that? Yeah.
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, there's always going to be complexity. Anybody that tells you there isn't going to be complexity, or you can get rid of complexity, is lying, because there's, it's always going to be there. I think it's how well is it abstracted, and then how well does the platform present, those networking options to you. And frankly, having a good partner in, whoever your vendor is going to, help you there too, because you're going to need help, and you're going to want features that might not be there. So, partnering with companies that are big enough to actually deliver it and not go out of business while you're mid project is going to be an important factor in all this.
So we're sort of walked through sort of a little bit of this, like this short history, and then sort of, if you were following SDN, OVN is probably sort of the latest and greatest. We describe what it is, and so as you sit here and you look at a network, and this is really a two-part question. One, where do you see, you've been very good at sort of forecasting the network ever since I've known you. I mean, Martin Casado would quote you. I mean, so if there was back in the day when he was getting sort of started, so you're sitting here now in 2020. So you're looking at sort of where we are, what we probably, just freelance on what we should be doing. And then like couple that with what is Edge going to do to us? Does that change everything? And, so there's one, like, how does data center, traditional networking, are we in the right place for now? Everything looks good. Are there some things you wish would happen? And then, like, let's throw in the sort of monkey wrench of, as Edge explodes for all sorts of types of organizations, what do we have to do there?
Well, I love the Edge story, and it's really the data gravity story that I think you introduced me to about 5 years ago. So
Dave McQuarrie is the author.
Yeah, right. So as a network guy, I went to my DevOps guru and you to open my eyes to the rest of the world. The data gravity story, or the Edge story in and of itself, is basically, you're going to have containers at Walmart, and it's going to be shipping containers in the back crunching numbers, and there's going to be networks required there, because it's going to be, it's expensive to move data in and out of clouds. That's especially out of clouds, right? So all that east-west processing that we talked about inside the data center becomes even more expensive when you start talking about moving that over WANs. So having that Edge functionality get hardened in the data center today, and now we just deploy it out to the Edge. So assume everything is east-west, and the only thing you're shipping back centrally are these summarizations of the transactions. I think you save a lot of money in the long run. So yeah, I think Edge is going to be really interesting. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, for the sort of uninformed, which I put myself in. So like, all right, so you got sort of data center east-west track. We talked about that. Now people are going to be putting sort of physical containers with racks that are going to run probably Kubernetes, OpenShift, Red Hat, OpenShift and containers, and that's going to have this on a sort of micro east-west explosion. But then somehow you have to make that all look like it's all east-west. I mean, is that like where, I'm going to say something where it could look really stupid, MPLS, or, I mean, how do you you sort of imply, if I was reading you right, you're implying that like that's all going to just be east-west, but there's going to be a lot of bounce between. So that's sort of east-west, north-south, east-west, north-south, right? But how do you make that all seem east-west?
Well, so all that functionality, so all your network services have to be totally disaggregated all the way down to the edge. So you can't have, this load balancer running at your central hub that is required by everything out on the edge. You can't have a firewall in that central hub that things at the edge are going to require. So I think the biggest thing in the future and even now is kind of that policy piece. So how do we load balance applications, and how do we isolate traffic between those applications appropriately to fit your compliance standards? So having that on the edge having everything disaggregated from central points is going to what enables it, but it also adds tons of complexity to it, because you're going to now have hundreds, if not maybe even thousands of labels you're trying to manage, that all have all have some kind of policy attached to it. So that's a fairly big problem in and of itself, because that's a lot of IP tables, that's a lot of flows that you're having to punch down into the hosts, and how do you keep that consistent across the cluster in a reasonable amount of time? Not easy problems, but they're all distributed system problems that are just with a much more granular approach than what we're used to in networking, which is like, here's a summarization of this address range, and that's the entry, as opposed to here's hundreds of thousands of individual IP addresses, and then the policies associated with each of those. So that individual data path is going to become more computationally intensive as the cluster grows. So I don't know if that makes sense or not.
So it is relatively still an aggregate. I mean, I know more about sort of the IoT, which is one of the variants of the edge, right? There are others. Retail, I think, will be stadiums. I mean, just all sorts of things. But in the IoT world, right, it's about,
if we have stadiums anymore.
Yeah, that's true. Maybe we don't need edge. Hey, no, no edge required for the next 5 years. No, sorry, now I'm being.
Home automation is where it's at now.
Yeah, no, it is pretty crazy. Some of the projects, that especially around sort of the aggregation of people and having to build containers around those sort of events, if you will.
Right.
But in IoT, right, it's about like just a ridiculous amount of sort of events, signals coming in, and then having the sort of shipping container sort of local to the cell tower or something that's receiving all that, and realizing we can't send all those up to some central cloud or even a central data center location. So then we put in a bunch of OpenShift clusters with containers in the physical container, the shipping container, and we do a lot of aggregation processing there, and then we sort of send up our summaries, as you say. That's basically what you're saying is what the new networking looks like. It's just that sort of connection of sort of network structures that are just sort of aggregating and disaggregating. Is that?
Yeah.
Well, hey, John, that was stupid. So
no, and I think you bring up a good point when it comes to the other thing is time and space. So we can't beat physics, right? So we can't go faster than the speed of light when we start talking about telco infrastructures and things like. I mean, these are things with synchronicity measured in the nanosecond. So there is no tolerance to delay. So you almost have to have the compute at the edge, because if it's it's not going to have time to go back to data centers and still deliver the service.
Autonomous vehicle, for example, right? I mean, if there's some like decision processing that has to be aggregated and can't be computational in the vehicle itself, right? You don't want that going all the way back to some Amazon AMI running like,
exactly.
Oh, let's give him the answer, sorry, too late, he fell off the cliff. He should have made a right, not a left. No, it's good stuff. So sort of in summary then, if there is a summary, I don't know, I think maybe we summarized, like, I mean, all right, so for people who aren't sort of network people, what would you say is sort of the things that people should be aware of right now, to at least understanding? I've had this conversation with you a lot of times. I have a lot of friends that work in banks, and they'll say, John, you should be a network, specialist in a bank. I'm like, you're out of your mind. Like, I say the buzzwords, but I don't really know how to do it. I said, you ought to hire somebody like Brent, right? Because in banks, they just struggle just with the word microsegmentation gets everybody riled up. Like, because, this could be another hour podcast. It seems to be that a lot of banks have flat networks, and I don't really understand that. Seems like that would be the worst place to have flat networks.
Yeah.
But we'll table that for another day. But they really get excited about this idea of sort of taking that sort of network complexity and being able to sort of overlay it. And anyways, all that said, in sort of, people who are not sort of network experts, what were the things that you would say that you could tell them, hey, I would really look into this. I think the world should use this, this, and this. Is that a fair question?
Yeah, and I mean, obviously looking at the platforms, and then how do you instantiate, network functions? And does it make sense to you? Is that the right abstraction? Is that, is punching everything into YAML configs to feel the appropriate way for you to deploy your environment? I mean, there's tons of, obviously there's about 5 podcasts wrapped up in there. I tend to talk more to people that are in networking and are trying to figure out where to go next. Yeah. And it's like, number one is always like learn Linux networking. Like that's kind of like step one. Like learn host networking, become a systems administrator, broaden your horizons beyond just networking, assuming you're not like, a full-blown maybe provider where you're just a router jockey, doing BGP policy all day. So yeah, like, and vice versa, like learn for people that are systems people, learn the basics of IP, learn your OSI layers, layer 1, 2, 3, 4, especially, because there's, the beauty of networking and why the internet has run for so many years is because there are those different layers of abstraction. You can drop any decent networking person into any environment and they can troubleshoot their way out of it, no matter how big or small it is, because networking operates at with those kind of strict functional rules and the layers. So if you're in networking, learn systems. If you're in systems, kind of start looking at the basics of networking.
Yeah, we can. I mean, if anything, if anybody picked anything up what you just talked about for the last like 45 minutes, is that history is repeatable here in networking, and there are just things that some of those geniuses. I have taken sort of a Linux networking course, right, and it's just amazing the genius of the computer scientists that came up with BGP and there are all those things. When you learn the history of where they came from, and these people were geniuses, and this stuff just stands, man. Like it stands today, and we, like you said, YAML is this and that. We can, how we do configuration is nice, easy, but at the end of the day, if I like, with a couple of minutes we got left, right? The thing I always ask you, and I've asked a lot of network experts, is, we talk about service mesh. I think maybe we're making another SDN problem. We're trying to do at layer 7, maybe stuff that should be done at layer 3, right? So, this whole promise of the service mesh doing everything, traffic rerouting, all, like, it'll be interesting to see what happens when sort of those type of compute clusters get to the level of scale. And is that the appropriate place? And then even my understanding of the layers helps me ask that question. So
yeah, that's gonna it. I think it's just time and iteration. I mean, nothing. Everything hits the trough of disillusionment.
Totally.
The
Jerry curve will survive every.
Yes.
Think we're going to do.
Absolutely.
Well, good. I think we're trying to keep these things somewhere less than 50 minutes. We'll do this again. I think we'll deep dive on some stuff next time. But I'm so happy that you're at Red Hat now too.
I love it.
Awesome.
I love it.
We worked together. We had so much fun with our startup. We sold it to Docker, and then I left Docker pretty early, and let you guys go down with that sinking ship. And,
John's got a good crystal
the
ball.
upside down well, if you will. But I'll stop. Always a blast, my buddy, friend. How do people find you one more time?
So just hit me up on Twitter at NetworkStatic, blog at networkstatic.net, or LinkedIn, whatever. I'm always interested in catching up with new people. I love it. Being at Red Hat, you've got the freedom to, community is always first, and it's a beautiful thing. Nobody does it like them. It starts with Chris Wright at the top as the CTO, who's the man. So
Yeah.
Nobody
The
does
only-
open source like
the
Red
network
Hat.
architect,
I'm not.
network expert. That's a CTO.
Yeah, it's unreal. Like Chris has forgotten more about networking than I'll ever learn. So yeah, it's a privilege.
All right, my friend. Take care.
Back here in the newsroom at TechStrong TV. It's always great. I got to tell you, on Tuesdays, having John Willis' interviews, I look forward to them. I think he does a great job. I hope you enjoy them as well. But let's jump into the news as usual, not meant to be exhaustive. Just a little smattering of what we've got going on our 3 sites, Security Boulevard, DevOps.com, and Container Journal. But please go to the sites and see the full lineup. There's a lot of good stuff there. First of all, so let's jump into it, though. And first, we're going to jump into Security Boulevard. 2 articles I want to highlight for today. One is that manufacturing is also facing remote working security risk. It's one thing to be developing code from home. It's another doing sales calls or marketing. But how do you do manufacturing remotely, right? It seems a little hard. And what are the security implications if you can do manufacturing remotely? So check out the article on Security Boulevard around that. I think it's something worth reading. Another one up on the Boulevard is 3 lessons learned from managing a distributed workforce during COVID-19. I think there'll be a lot more than 3 lessons we all learned, but these are 3 good ones. I think it's a good start, a fine start, as they say in used to say in Las Vegas when I'd go there. Next up, and I'm looking forward to being back in Vegas again one day, actually. Over on Container Journal, we have a good article about Fairwinds makes IT monitoring service for Kubernetes available. It's just a lot of stuff orbiting around this Kubernetes solar system here, and the Fairwinds IT monitoring service is yet another one. Check out the article on that. Also on Container Journal, our friends at SNCC are now partnering with Red Hat. I think this came out of Red Hat Summit last week. SNCC is partnering with Red Hat on OpenShift security. So it'll be good, I think, as OpenShift becomes more and more of a dominant distribution and player in the Kubernetes market, having kind of built-in or tightly integrated security will be a key part of it. And the guys at SNCC, folks at SNCC, there's more than guys there, are doing a great job with it. And then finally, over on DevOps.com, I've got 2 articles I wanted to, actually 3 I wanted to call to your attention. One is DevOps as a service, migrating your entire DevOps stack to the cloud. And, look, there was a time where people didn't think DevOps as a service was doable, possible. It was a figment of people's imaginations. But, as the DevOps markets matured, DevOps as a service has matured. And maybe it isn't what people thought it was back then, but it is something. And read the article, find out more about that. Secondly is enterprise Kanban implementations, where to start and how to scale across an organization. Of course, to me, Kanban always starts with Dominica de Grandes, but have a good look at the article. I think you'll enjoy it. And Kanban is, we use Trello. To us is sort of an electronic Kanban board, and we use that a lot here at Media Ops to track our flow. And then lastly, your applications are the weakest security link. I always thought our people were the weakest security link, but the author in this one is showing that applications are. And again, good DevSecOps, AppSec kind of article up on DevOps.com. As I mentioned, that's what, 3, 6, 8 articles. There's so many more. Go look at our sites if you've got some time. You want to stay up on what's happening. But that's going to be the news for today, Tuesday, May 5th. Next up, well, it's that time where we head over to our managing editor, Charlene O'Hanlon. And Charlene has 2 great interviews for us today. So Charlene, take it away.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Welcome back, everybody, to TechStrong TV. I am Charlene O'Hanlon, Managing Editor at Media Ops, and I am here today with Codility CEO Natalia Panowitz, and she is going to talk to us about the dearth of COBOL engineers and the not death of the COBOL language. So, Natalia, thank you so much for taking a couple minutes and talking with me today.
My pleasure.
Great, great. So I know that your company is working hard to kind of prep the next generation of COBOL engineers to kind of help solve the crisis that I think a lot of organizations are feeling these days with the lack of qualified COBOL engineers out there. And we keep hearing, you know, we've heard the horror stories about the government agencies that don't have enough COBOL engineers to process, such as the unemployment the unemployment applications and just everything is so backed up because they just don't have enough people to work on it. So we also keep hearing that COBOL is a quote-unquote dead language. So first of all, I thought maybe you could tell us a little bit about Codility and how you guys are involved in the COBOL effort.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Pleasure to be here with you. Codility is an evidence-based platform that various customers of ours are using to assess programming skills of their job candidates, of their teams. These customers can skills map their existing engineering teams, upskill them with Codility, etc. Therefore, what we do is we provide various programming tasks and environments for engineering candidates to solve them, either together in person, right now remotely actually, with the hiring managers, or through asynchronous assessments. And recently, actually, so last year was when we, to our big surprise, we actually saw a surge in requests for COBOL assessments from our customers. In the past, the top list of technologies that our customers were looking for were the likes of Kubernetes, Docker, Terraform, AWS, Azure. We all support that, and we similarly, like the whole world, we thought that COBOL is probably a language of the past. But something happened last year, and it seems to be a great demand for COBOL developers right now. We actually understand it this way. This is a language that was first developed in the late 50s. It was connected to early digitization of the 60s and 70s. So a lot of early systems, especially in traditional banking, in government services, and insurance, and healthcare providers, are actually still relying on COBOL. All the while, nobody is teaching COBOL at university, so it stopped being part of the modern curriculum. For some time, it was regarded even as a curiosity language, old-fashioned, almost extinct. And right now, the whole world is finding itself in a dire need to find developers that can actually maintain, patch, and develop those ancient systems from the past. That, as you mentioned, right now government services are relying heavily on. So there were a lot of efforts we feel like in the recent years to rewrite COBOL systems into modern technologies, but not all of it, of course, is done. COBOL engineers are very, very scarce. Also, probably the median age of COBOL engineers, because of the fact that the language is not part of modern curriculum anymore, is on the higher side. So the whole world found itself in need of filling this gap.
So what do you think it was that happened at the end of or last year that kind of spiked interest in COBOL?
We think that that there's actually an effort. So probably a couple of phenomena at the same time. One would be a natural let's say fading out of traditional COBOL engineers from their workforce, and then there's a need to find people that can still maintain and work with these systems. So this is a natural a trend.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, we observe an interest, heightened interest in digitization across governmental services in various countries. So Codility supports customers and institutions all around the globe. We feel that in the last year or so, there is definitely a heightened interest into digitizing further within the governmental institutions. This is also something that we have noticed, and we throughout the years we do see traditional industries continuing with digitization. So initially our customers were the tech companies of the world, so the Microsofts, the Amazons of the world. Right now, we serve many traditional banking, healthcare, banking institutions, healthcare providers, as well as governments in their effort to build high-performing engineering teams.
Excellent. Well, yeah, I can tell you for a fact that I know that COBOL is nowhere near being a dead language. We have, there's one article that we ran on DevOps.com maybe 2-3 years ago, and it still consistently ranks as one of our most read articles on DevOps.com. So I know that there's still a lot of interest. And that really, I find it fascinating that schools have kind of put it on the back shelf, if you will, or on the back burner. Do you think that that's going to change as more organizations recognize the fact that, you know, COBOL engineers are still very much necessary, especially in organizations that have these mainframes and these systems of record?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I think that we're generally seeing traditional schools and institutions a little bit slower to react to trends than non-traditional institutions such as boot camps, such as online programming courses and support for various engineers. So I actually feel that we will see that earlier in that segment than in traditional schools, but who knows? Very, very likely. What would you think?
Well, I think that you know, if demand is high enough, there's definitely going to be a trend back toward teaching it. But to your point, it's very possible that we'll see it mostly in the non-traditional college, you know, environment, more of the online or the kind of the master class type courses, something like that. That's a very good point. You know, one thing that really fascinates me is just the fact that, you know, for so many years, people have been basically, you know, tolling the death knell for COBOL, but it seems to be a language that just won't die. So, you know, people will say, well, you know, if we didn't have these systems of record that ran the COBOL, then we wouldn't need it. But, you know, are we ever going to get to a point where the mainframes and the systems of records will just have to be refactored or you know, put into another language to accommodate the fact that, you know, we are, you know, we're still kind of seeing a decline in the number of engineers that do know the COBOL language, and so that, you know, that might actually impact.
Absolutely, that can potentially change. I think there's definitely right now a appreciation to COBOL and COBOL engineers, rightfully so. It's a beautiful part of computer science history. So I do hope that we change that sentiment a little bit.
Mm-hmm. How many, you know, when you are talking about the number of engineers who are working with you to learn COBOL and you know and help out with these systems of record, how many are we talking? I mean, are we talking hundreds, thousands, or you know, is it and is it maybe broken out by region or by country?
Mm-hmm. So for now we offer assessments in COBOL for customers that are hiring COBOL engineers. That would still not, of course, be the majority of Codility assessments. This is really a subset a subset of languages that Codility assessments can be solved in. So it still would be probably in hundreds monthly rather than thousands.
All right. Well, that's nothing to sneeze at, though. That's a pretty good number. Are they in particular regions or particular countries, or is it worldwide?
We definitely see a lot of interest in United States, for the rightful reason of where COBOL originated. So absolutely, many institutions from United States are looking for COBOL engineers. We do see some interest from Western Europe as well. Excellent. So we do tie it to industries that were one of the first industries and regions that were one of the first to digitize.
Okay, all right. So do you think that we're going to see kind of a leveling off then of maybe a need or interest in the COBOL as maybe the year goes on and a lot of these government organizations in particular have fulfilled their need for additional support?
So we actually think that we will see a wave of interest right now, probably to stabilize after some time. Let's say at another level, but we do not think that COBOL will be the hottest language of the future. Probably not, but still very useful and with an increased interest right now.
So you think we'll always have a need for COBOL programmers?
We still see years of need.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's good. That's great. Well, Natalia, thank you so much for talking with me about this. It's very interesting. I just love the fact that COBOL is like a zombie language. It never really dies. So that's really great. And I appreciate your taking the time and walking me through what you guys are doing and how you're helping keep the COBOL language very much alive.
Thank you so much. Very much alive and kicking, to everybody's surprise. But thank you.
All right, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Okay, everybody, stay tuned. We've got lots more TechStrong TV coming up, so stick around.
Disruption is occurring across every aspect of IT. Open source, cloud services, DevOps, and cloud-native software architectures are democratizing IT and radically transforming how business is done. The old ways of creating software and doing IT are being replaced with agile, flexible, faster, and cheaper methods, benefiting vendors and users alike. Accelerated Strategies Group is out to democratize access of industry expertise and knowledge. We use our expertise and experience to offer insightful, intelligent, useful information in a variety of formats relevant to the IT community: digital events, videos, reports, assessments, workshops, and implementation projects with tech vendors, IT organizations, and business leaders. We widely and openly share our work products, often for free. Analyst reports these days aren't worth more than a graph or chart that tells a story or illustrates a market trend. We work with developers, DevOps teams, cloud architects, security engineers, and transformation leaders most every day, creating and implementing transformational strategies and technologies. We're not just thinkers, we're also doers.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Welcome back, everybody, to TechStrong TV. I am Charlene O'Hanlon, Managing Editor at Media Ops, and I'm here today with Dan Schlafer, who is the co-founder and CEO of a company called Chart IQ. Dan, thanks so much for taking a couple of minutes and talking with me today. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
So I'm kind of interested in this idea that your folks sent over to me, which is how companies or how investors specifically can kind of make use of some of the data sets that are being generated as a result of this pandemic. And I know, we're talking about technology and DevOps and security and such, but this really kind of piqued my interest. So can you kind of walk me through the idea here?
Yeah, absolutely. And we can talk about how it relates to DevOps in a moment as well. Fundamentally, my company is about storytelling. So how do you tell stories with data? And we're focused on investors and traders and folks that participate in the stock and bond markets. But our job is to tell stories with data. And so I think in today's environment with COVID and we're all working from our homes and trying to figure out what's going on, but also looking after our 401ks or our investments, whether we're day traders or just investing for retirement, we want to understand the impact that what's happening in the world is having on the market. And so from my perspective, that's storytelling. And I want to know and be able to see, hey, the market is down today or it's up today. Well, why is that? What's happening? And as we learn about potential treatments or vaccines, or there's a particular outbreak, all of these things that we're hearing about, how do they relate to what's happening in the markets?
Okay, all right. So how does your company fit in?
Yeah, so we provide the charting technology that your viewers will use if they go to Yahoo Finance or they go to CNBC.com or they log into their E-Trade account. So we're providing the technology to either the websites and mobile apps or the brokerages that investors use day to day when they're making their decisions. So we work with our clients, the big brokers and financial websites, to help them pull in the data that is relevant. Maybe that's from Johns Hopkins University with outbreak information, or maybe that's from various governments around the world as to what's happening, and then contextually present it with what's happening in a particular security or a particular market. If I have in my 401k, I might have mutual funds or an ETF that has exposure to Italy. And so I want to see, well, is the situation in Italy getting better or worse? And should I be changing things in my portfolio as a result? And so being able to pull all of that data together and then present it in a way that you can just see it and it's plain and obvious.
Okay, all right. So you mentioned before that there may be a DevOps angle to this. So how can we kind of connect this to DevOps?
Yeah, so it's an interesting part of what we do. So if you think about our technology, when you're looking at a web page or a mobile app, we're the thing that's actually rendering the charts and making them interactive so that you can zoom and pan and do an analysis on it. But we have to access all of the data, and honestly, it's this explosion of data that's happening. And so I have friends that are in DevOps, and one of the biggest problems that they have in these kinds of situations is how do they actually pull in data, normalize that data, and then expose that data to the application developers that they're working with to be able to deliver that to their users. And so what we've done and have done for years is focused on the ability of the chart itself, which is some JavaScript code living in the browser, to connect off to multiple different data sources, pull it in and normalize it and mash it up on the fly. And so we often are working with the IT and DevOps teams that are responsible for delivering content and data to the application providers and helping them see where it's important that it goes through their databases, normalization layers, and into production versus being able to pull it directly from Johns Hopkins and helping to put in place the infrastructure to do that.
Okay, all right. So it's bringing in that data in real time then, so that the information that's being presented is, I imagine, as timely as it can be.
Correct. Pulling in real-time relevant information and making it a lot quicker for application developers and DevOps teams partnering together to go from an idea of here's the data that we want, here's the story that we want to tell, to building it and deploying it and putting it in front of users. Because if we've learned anything in the past 6 or 8 weeks, it's that things change very quickly. And so the ability to come up with an idea and bring it to life and deliver it to users very quickly is important to all of us.
All right. Have you noticed any trends that maybe from some of your customers who are using your technology as it pertains to this pandemic? Any trends that they're seeing with the data?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first and foremost, they're all seeing huge increases in traffic. So that's of course relevant to DevOps and IT. Our customers are getting deluged with users. If you look at any of the statistics on the number of trades being executed by your Fidelities and E-Trades, the number of website views going to Yahoo Finance and CNBC, they are in fact through the roof. So that's certainly a thing, is just a hunger for information and a lot of people checking the markets more than they normally would. But I think it's your average mom and pop investor probably doesn't think about other alternative data sets as they're known very often. They're worried about what's happening to the stocks that they own, what's happening to the broader market, and that's about it. And so what I would say the trend has been is really this curiosity and a bit more of a global perspective on data. And people are going to these websites from the CDC or Johns Hopkins and trying to figure out what's going on, both as it's relevant to their own personal lives and their health and safety, but also how it's relevant to their retirement account and their financial planning. And so where the public has more questions and is relying on going out and trying to assimilate information from all these different sources, provides an opportunity for us and our clients to deliver, again, storytelling that pulls all of that together.
Okay, all right. So let's take a little broader view here when we're talking about the data, especially as the data that's related to the pandemic. What are some of the other use cases that we could possibly use that data for, in especially with perhaps your technology, maybe not so much fintech, but just kind of in general, that ways that we could interpret that data?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting. We are focused in finance, and so most of our customers are banks and brokerages and technology providers in finance. But we're actually seeing a lot more customers coming to us. We focus in the analysis of time series data. So we're not general purpose data visualization. We are time series specific. But as it turns out, a lot of people have internal data metrics coming from their own systems. Certainly in the world of DevOps, people are used to having a lot of time series information about their servers and their systems and uptime and availability and performance. And so whether it's pulling data on the performance of what's happening in AWS clusters, or it's what's happening with an equity being traded on the London Stock Exchange, data is data, and the ability to pull that in and pull it in real time. And so what you are seeing is the relationship between, for instance, outbreak information and the number of cases that are being reported, to everything from the supply chain and how that's affecting inside businesses, how they think about supply chain risk from different regions, how they're thinking about their treasury management and cash management in the CFO's office. All different sorts of parts of the business that normally wouldn't be thinking about these global issues are now having to think about them. And so contextualizing the metrics and the key performance indicators that are being collected in those parts of the business and contextualizing them with outside information can be really valuable.
All right. Well, they say that data is the new gold, if you will. So it's good to see that it's being used in many different ways, and hopefully it'll help save my retirement account, at least partially. So
we certainly hope so too. And I think we're living in a world where there's more data than ever before, and it's about how to make that data digestible and understandable and ultimately actionable. And so whether it's saving your retirement account or something else, you need to be able to see the data, understand the data, and decide whether you do something or do nothing. And that's where I think there's great opportunity for all of us.
All right, great. Well, Dan, thanks so much for taking the time and talking with me. Appreciate your expertise and love to talk about it another time, perhaps.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Great, thanks. Okay, everybody, stay tuned for more TechStrong TV. We've got lots more coming up, so stick around.
All righty. Thanks, Charlene. Two nice interview there. And actually, two nice interviews there. And, you know, now, after Charlene, we head over to the analyst corner with Mitch. Mitchell Ashley has some good thoughts today in his analyst corner segment. And then a good video interview with App Dynamics' Danny Wicker. So I'll be back after that to wrap things up. But now let's head over to Mitch.
Earlier this week, I appeared on a webinar. The topic was the humans of DevOps. It was all about upskilling. It was a readout on a report from some analysis that was done as part of the DevOps Institute, Jane Grohl's organization, who you know well from our channels here, our programming on TechStrong TV. And the topic actually was great because there was some analysis that was presented, but then also a pretty rich panel discussion driven largely from the audience and the questions that they had. There were a couple of responses that I gave to a few questions that I wanted to say a little bit more about. And whether you attended the webinar or not, kind of follow the topic here. One of the things I learned pretty early in my career, you know, there are others around me who felt like their manager was responsible for their career. Their manager was responsible for their own development. Now keep in mind, this is a while ago, and a lot of folks thought that you would spend most of your career, if not all of your career, at one company. Kind of hard to think about even now, even though that does happen. It's not very common now. Of course, I learned pretty quickly that really I had to be in control. I had to be responsible. And frankly, I'm the best person to kind of drive my own career, my own personal development. And I just took that philosophy and shared that with the people that I worked with and that worked for me on organizations that I was a part of. Part of that philosophy is also, well, what is the manager's role? If you're responsible for your own career, then does your manager have any involvement in that, or no, or what is it if they are involved? Here's what I've learned I think is an important role for managers to play. And in part, comes from an answer that I gave to a question about KPIs and measuring the upskilling, the development of the organization and people in it. My philosophy is that one of the key roles, maybe one of the most, if not the most important roles, is the growth of the people that you're responsible for. Now, they're responsible for the growth themselves, but you're responsible for setting up, cultivating an environment for that growth to happen. And that can be, of course, supporting going to conferences, maybe virtual now, taking training classes, buying books, all kinds of resources, but really tailoring that part of it to the individual person. If they learn well by buying books and doing self-study, and that's what really kind of is most effective for them, great, support it that way, where someone else may need to go to a workshop or go to a class, go to an online learning, whatever that might be. But for a manager, for my managers that have worked for me, a measurement is always what's the growth of your people over a period of time. Now, how do you define growth? Lots of ways you could define growth. One sort of simple way is, what can someone do? What has someone had an opportunity to do and demonstrate that they could do or learn to do over a period of time? In the last 6 months, what has this person been able to do, accomplish, some function they couldn't perform before, maybe at the same skill level they have now over the last 6 months? And you can go individual by individual. And if someone's in a very routine job, creating more opportunities for them or finding their learning style is super important. That's where you want to pay attention. Some folks are very self-motivated, self-starters. You're not going to have any problem with them continuing to develop their skills. Maybe it's just some coaching and some nurturing along the way. But think about that as a metric, especially if you're in HR. We talk about measuring the professional development of our organization. Well, what are you going to measure? Number of courses that we went to? Is that really a measure of someone's personal development? Certainly it's a measure of an activity, but really it's about what are they capable of doing because of an investment they've made or you've made with them. So think about ways that you might be able to measure growth. By the way, that same metric applies to us as individuals. What am I able to do that I wasn't able to do 6 months ago? If I haven't learned too much, then problem is probably me. Well, it's definitely me. So look inside and see what is it that you'd really like to continue working on, expanding, maybe really stretch the boundaries, your comfort level, and step into some new things. If you haven't done podcasting before, and that's something you're interested in, great, go do it. You don't have to change the world in your podcast in 60 days, but you can certainly start on it. Or maybe you need to learn more about how to set up a CI/CD pipeline or developing certain kind of software, architecture in the cloud, some new technology that's happening from the vendors that you're working with, whatever it might be. You as a leader can also develop those skills as well as your professional leadership skills. And again, one of the key areas to invest is how are your people growing? What's the growth have they had? So consider that as you think about this time with COVID and work at home, economic crisis, budgets getting tightened, you may have to be more creative. And don't let your folks assume that because the economy is pretty challenging or the budgets have been hit, that all types of investment in personal growth is off. It's not. $49 for a book, some time to go work on that, whatever method, an online course, going to Udemy and taking a course through that, or maybe through professional development education at a university online, etc. There are still lots of ways that you can invest in them, including giving an opportunity, create an environment where they can try something new or pursue an area that they have a passion in or a budding passion. So that's our role. Keep that in mind as you're thinking about this environment. Yeah, there's lots of challenges, but you still need to invest and grow and help nurture and mentor your folks. So I wish you the best in doing that. Also, I have a request. I've talked earlier about some of the new research that we've been doing, just to kind of shift a little bit, that we're doing some research in the software delivery management area. And we've kicked off a new research program a couple of weeks ago and a survey. We would really appreciate if you would take that survey. It takes about 7 minutes. It's not hard, it's pretty quick. I know some of those surveys get really complex with big long matrices. We tried not to do too much of that. So I think you can get through it pretty quickly. And of course, we will share the content, the results of that with everyone. And certainly folks that take it will get a first bite at that apple. So one of the things that is important to Accelerate Strategies Group is this idea that knowledge wants to be free, which is why we make our research freely available. We don't put it behind a purchase wall where you have to pay a subscription or something. And I know that's a business model that's worked for other analyst firms. Our approach is different. It's when we engage you and we have ways of making money to compensate us for our work, but it's just not come from sharing or publishing our content. So part of that is also sharing that knowledge is something that we do called the 30-minute inquiry, which is where you can talk to any one of our analysts on topics, of course, that we're knowledgeable on around digital transformation, DevOps, cloud native, and cybersecurity. And you can sign up for a free 30-minute inquiry. We used to call it consult. Now we're referring to it as an inquiry with any of our analysts. Maybe Mark Hornby, because you want to talk about testing strategies and test automation and kind of pick his brain about his book, Engineering DevOps. It could be Gary Groover or Sanjeev Sharma, Helen Beal, any number of folks. You've heard of most of those folks and others. Bob Russelman, a lot of folks that are on our team that are published authors and speakers. So the good thing is they're making themselves available because they want to help. They have a passion for helping people. And yes, it's about sharing their knowledge, but it also develops their expertise, their knowledge, their experience by being exposed to more companies who are dealing with different challenges. And those challenges may have shifted in this COVID environment, COVID-19. So you can take advantage of that free offer. by visiting the Accelerated Strategies website. It's accelst.com. And there's a button down halfway through the page. You can see all the analysts, their bios, what their expertise is, and request a free inquiry there. Also, regarding that survey I mentioned, the easiest way to take that is to go to acceleratedsurvey.com, and you'll find it there. Thanks for listening, and I wish you the best. Whether it's working on a challenging problem we might be able to help you with through an inquiry, helping us do some of the research that we'll be glad to share with you as we pull that together, or it's also ideas about how to develop and grow your people. And I'm always open to talking with anyone who'd like to have a chat. Thanks for listening.
DevOps.com is the #1 online destination for DevOps education and community building. DevOps.com covers all aspects of DevOps, including DevOps best practices and tools, DevOps culture, DevSecOps, business impact, continuous testing, continuous delivery, and more. DevOps.com has the largest collection of original DevOps content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.devops.com to learn more. DevOps.com, where the world meets DevOps.
Hi, Mitch Ashley. I'm here with Danny Wicker, who is the GM at AppDynamics, and we're talking about coronavirus and some of the impacts, some of the uses, some of the ties to the future of work, future of business, as both we deal with the current lockdown situation, but also businesses are dealing with economic impact and what it'll look like on the other side of that. So good to have you interviewing you today, Danny.
Thank you. It's nice to be here, Mitch.
Would you just tell us a little bit about yourself? If people don't know you or don't know a little bit about AppDynamics, tell us about that too.
Sure. Yeah. So like you said, I'm the general manager of the AppDynamics business. We're a part of Cisco Systems, and I've been with the company myself for about 4 years, which was a year before Cisco acquired us. And we go back about 12 years and are the leading provider of what we call application performance management solutions. And so technology that many of the largest brands and enterprises in the world are using to instrument and monitor their broad application estates. So basically all of the nodes, components, and dependencies that their core applications rely upon in order to run in a performant way and deliver fantastic experiences for the users of those applications, whether they're inside the company as employees or externally with the customers that they now interact with increasingly in a digital domain.
Mm-hmm. Super helpful to have some data to try to understand what the experience of your customers is. So fantastic.
Critical.
Cool space to be in. So let's talk a little bit, and I think I told you ahead of time, just some of the things we've been looking at through accelerated strategies and some of the research we're doing around COVID-19, both lockdown and economic impact and kind of post coming out of that. What's your perspective on, the digital services, cloud services, technology, and the role that's playing in the pandemic?
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously, even prior to this whole pandemic and everybody working from home, there was a lot of focus on digital transformation, people using digital technologies, applications as a way to interact. And I think that, with the pandemic and with work from home, we've obviously seen a dramatic further acceleration of those trends that had already begun. And so, as we work with customers and large enterprise organizations around the world, it's evident to us in working with them that in the context of this pandemic, a lot of initiatives and efforts that they already in many cases had begun have now just accelerated. Mm-hmm. They're relying on applications that they use to conduct business internally, that their employees use to actually run the internal operations of their organizations. Even more, because obviously everybody's working from home. And so the primary method of connecting into the business, of course, is all through applications. And of course, it's also become an even greater way that they now depend upon in interacting with their customers, with their partners, with their external stakeholders as well, in order to transact, conduct business, deliver products and services. All of that is happening, obviously, in a digital arena. And at the very heart of that digital arena our applications. That of course is sort of the organizing unit around which customers or partners or external stakeholders interact with a company. And so we see the work from home context as accelerating those efforts, and I expect that will have lasting impact, because
I agree with you there.
Yeah, the progress that's being made during this time is not going to obviously all just recede and go away. When things open back up, and even when people are a little bit more free to connect with each other in person, I expect we'll continue to see a lot of use of the digital technologies for the benefits that they do offer, and those, like I said, I think are being accelerated right now.
Well, and many folks, myself included, think it'll be a slow roll, kind of phased, going back even to folks going back to work. And we have some data around how many people actually would still prefer to work from home, at least some, maybe quite a few days per week. So let me ask, do you have some access, kind of anonymized access to data around your customers and some of the performance that you're seeing? Or is this more interacting with your customers and what they're telling you as they use your products and services about what's happening?
Yeah, I mean, we have some anonymized access to data with respect to the customers that use our solution in SaaS. So we have two deliveries of the way that we deliver App Dynamics. One is where we operate it on behalf of the customer as a SaaS offering, and then we also deliver the software for on-premises use within the customer's own data center. And so we have a mix of customers using both of those things. Most of the data that I'm sharing with you now is from live direct interaction that our global sales organization and our services and delivery organizations are having with customers. And then we will be able to tap into at least the SaaS part of our offering to get updated data for at least that subset of our customers.
Great. I'm excited to hear. Tell us what your sales folks are hearing from customers.
Yeah, I mean, I think what we're seeing right now. Obviously, the way I think about it is in phases. The first phase of this, I would say, was everybody just sort of going through the shock of the new reality and implementing things that I would maybe broadly classify as just business continuity priorities, right? Like everyone's suddenly working from home. What are the minimal emergency things that need to happen in order for, in many cases, thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of employees in some large organizations to be able to connect and work from home tomorrow morning, right? And so that becomes obviously the most immediate business continuity need. And then as a few weeks have gone on and some of those needs are addressed, we see companies then sort of turning to the next phase of, okay, we're operating. What does this mean for how we're going to operate over the medium term? With the expectation that we may be, that we may be in this situation for months, to at least some degree. And then what is the longer term plan that we want to put in place for a post-pandemic, a post-lockdown reality, with the expectation that it won't be exactly the same as things were before this happened.
New normal won't be the old normal.
Exactly. So we'll have a new normal, and APM and the monitoring capabilities that we provide, the business insights that we provide with technologies that we have like Business IQ, which gives you business data out of your applications. Those things are things that we're starting to see real focus on as you look at sort of the second and third phase more than the first phase. The first phase is, like I said, just business continuity, connect people up, take care of those immediate and urgent needs.
Email, video conferencing, collaboration tools, access to internal data systems they need to keep working.
Exactly.
The basics, if you want to think
basic connectivity. That's exactly right. Your VPNs, your basic security, your basic video conferencing capabilities, and in some organizations, making sure people have laptops and network access, right? So it varies organization to organization, geography by geography, but some of them don't have even those basics in place. So I'd say that's phase one. But as we shift increasingly into phase two, we see organizations beginning to tackle the stress that is now being placed on their core applications. because the usage of those applications has increased, of course, from where things were when we were interacting in more of a physical world. And so we do see a number of efforts where organizations are moving ahead and in some cases accelerating efforts to implement world-class monitoring capabilities for application estates that are under stress and having to flex. And you know, in many cases, we see some of that flex also accelerating initiatives to move to cloud technologies.
Because ask you first, before we go on, I'm curious, is this primarily customer interactions that are now being much more digital because they're not going to retail stores or calling up on phones as easily, or maybe they're just using web and mobile apps more? Is that where the demand increase is coming from that they're seeing?
We see some of both, honestly, but yeah, probably on balance, maybe a bit more from external customers, but we do see some of both because, again, with all employees, especially when you're dealing with larger organizations, all employees now working almost exclusively in a digital domain, it is also placing some stress even on internal-facing applications that are employee-facing applications. So it is ultimately some of both. I mean, we're working in a digital fashion in every aspect of our lives, both as employees and as consumers or individuals.
We are. Yes,
yeah.
we are.
Yeah.
One of the things that we've also seen is companies are starting to shift how they interact with their customers because they can't be, in physical contact with them, can't be in showrooms at stores.
That's right.
Contactless type of interfaces with customers, which means they're doing more through email, through actions that customers can do by clicking on something in an email or an app that for, let's say, a drive-up delivery at curbside kind of things.
Exactly.
What other kinds of things have you seen? I assume you've seen those, but have you seen other kinds of shifts of how companies are interacting with their customers?
Yeah, I mean, we see, definitely a lot of attempts at virtual experiences, creating ways to market in new and different ways. So, lots of companies that are trying to figure out how to be helpful during the COVID-19 situation. So, creative ways of thinking about one's core business and how to adapt the skills, the capabilities, the products, the services that are offered to actually help with needs that have arisen during this time among certain customer constituents, and by providing use of products, services during this time, A, being genuinely helpful, B, building some trust and loyalty and appreciation during a time of need, and then C, hopefully winning a long-term relationship from those customers. But yeah, we see things around virtual experiences. We see the incorporation of entertainment. To the point of sort of being creative around sort of marketing and the needs that people feel right now. Everyone's cooped up from home, and we're all human. People are looking for things to do, and so we do see some companies looking at ways not only to be helpful in more critical needs, but also just fun, humor, entertainment, ways to deliver things for people to do, games to play, things like that.
I call that battling against the same day syndrome. Every day is Sunday, right?
Exactly. That's exactly right.
So you mentioned multiple phases kind of being in this phase 2. Describe what you see as phase 3 and phase 4, kind of the next steps of what you think will happen.
Yeah, I think that phase 3 will be as things do start to open up and we all face the questions that are being debated, I think, around executive board tables all over the world right now, as to what will be that new normal, and how do business leaders and policymakers help to shape that new normal in ways that reflect some of the requirements of the new reality, but also look to take advantage of some of the opportunities of that new reality. And I think we've lived in a world where the pace of go was very high. Commuting and travel were stressing people in significant ways. And I do think that there are a lot of very interesting conversations going on right now that we see where interesting questions are being asked about do we need to go back to that way of doing things, or perhaps with all of the advances that we are taking as a society all at once in this sort of massive coordinated experiment that we're in, to go digital, work from home, get everybody set up with their cameras and their work from home situations, and networks are scaled up to handle it. That offers us an opportunity to take advantage of those things in a post-pandemic reality. And so I do think that we're very likely to see more flexible work arrangements. I do think we're very likely to see more online interaction in creative ways between customers and the companies that they do business with. And that's something that we're certainly preparing for in our role as an application monitoring organization. And during the pandemic, we've launched our own initiatives in anticipation of that. We call it Project Assist internally, where we've made available our technologies as well as services and education offerings that we have to organizations who are moving into those phases, right? So we've said, hey, we understand that you're planning for a new reality. We understand that you may be under some immediate strain. Go ahead and avail yourself of these technologies, learn what they can do, and you can use them for free for a period of time, so that you can benefit from them during the crisis phase. Let's call that phase 1, phase 2. But then also begin to understand what is possible as you move into phase 3, phase 4, where the reliance on the digital technologies is likely going to last and persist, and something that can actually help advance the business in interesting and creative ways.
I think it's very arguable. A good argument you could make is the organizations who have already invested in and are well down the way of incorporating or embracing digital transformation type journey, wherever they are on that, are going to be in a much better position to react to whatever a new reality is, versus if you're just starting your digital transformation today, you still need to do it, but that's a tough place to be. I think you certainly don't have the agility and the flexibility, maybe the organizational alignment and institutional knowledge of how to react yet. There's a lot of culture, technology, process, all of those things that goes into doing this. I see your head shaking your head a lot.
For sure. Yeah, that's a really big part of it. You have a great point, which is it's not just about the technology, the people processes, the organizational process, the operating model. Those things are as big of a challenge as the technology. And you're right that the organizations that were already down the path on that journey, I think, are advantaged in a situation like this. But the reality is that with the pressure being put on that transformation by this whole event and the experience that we're all having, wherever you started on the journey, you're either taking a significant step further forward right now, or you're getting weeded out. The organizations that are not able to flex and adapt to at least some degree, I think are unfortunately going to find it really difficult to get through and recover from this. And so it is definitely one of those situations where the ability to flex, transform, adjust, and change the way you operate is really, really critical, I think, to survival right now.
One of the things that I try to talk a little bit more about, because I don't see as much conversation about it. Let me pause for a second on that. You've got a little bit of gray in your beard, not nearly as much as I have. So I'm guessing you've been through some economic challenging times like 2008, for example. But those experiences taught me that part of the challenge of rebuilding businesses when you have a national or international global economic situation is rebuilding those supply chains, because people go out of business, their business model changed, they go into cash starvation or cash hoarding type situations. They may not be in a place to respond, or they may be ahead of you, like at least some people claim is happening in China, that they're ready, but they don't have ways of doing transportation of goods. Not that everybody's buying a lot of those yet anyway. Do you see ways that organizations are thinking about their suppliers and how they're going to plan to rebuild their businesses suppliers come and go, or long-term partners maybe change their strategies too?
Yeah, I think it's an important point. I mean, to the point of the phase one, we've been talking throughout this discussion around sort of the phases. Phase one of sort of the shock of the situation, we've definitely seen a clamp down on cash needs. To your point, right? Organizations, I think, are in many cases uncertain as to exactly what their cash situation is going to be, because cash flows are being interrupted in many industries. And so I do see a lot of focus and interest from large corporations around the world on how do they make arrangements that are cash efficient for them, right? So we do see things like, interest in financing and deferring payments and setting up, to your point, supply chains and vendor relationships that are optimized to give them cash flexibility, as opposed to relationships that may have been optimized for a different purpose prior to the pandemic. So, cash efficiency, cash deferrals, those sorts of things are things that are definitely priorities. And it's one of the reasons we feel, frankly, very fortunate to be part of Cisco. If we look at AppDynamics, relative to some of the other players in the APM space, by being part of such a large global organization that has the strength of balance sheet and the cash capabilities that we have, we're able to actually offer a lot of favorable financing and deferral options to customers that we do see a lot of demand for right now. It's a big part of what companies are doing, for sure.
When it seems like larger technology suppliers, like you mentioned with Cisco, at least have the opportunity to see on a much larger scale, maybe across the organizations within their customers, what they're dealing with, what their plans are, varying levels of exposure, whereas one solution provider of somewhere in the software stack or infrastructure may or may not have access to seeing quite so much. Well, great. Just want to wrap up and ask is there any other thoughts or anything else you want to share? I'm happy to pick your brain for an hour, but we don't have an hour, so I would make sure to give you a chance to let go of whatever tidbits there may be still you want to share with us.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it, Mitch. Yeah, I think it's, as we were talking about, we find ourselves at an extremely interesting juncture with this whole event. And, I do think that we will come out the other side changed. And I mean that by we as people, right? The humanity will come out the other side changed. And, we're very optimistic that those will be changes that ultimately are for the better. We all spend a lot of time commuting and traveling, and there are implications that has on resource consumption and environment, many different dimensions. And I do think this is a great opportunity for the technology industry to really showcase its value, and for connectivity, applications, digital interactions to hopefully help bring us to a better place where we have a little bit more balance, and can find, of course, the time we all are thirsting for back in the physical world, but also save some of the time that may have been wasted or used inefficiently and at great expense to time and to environment, to reclaim some of that for ourselves and create a little bit more balance. And I'm hopeful that this brings us there.
I share a lot of the same hope. And I think that's important to, it's a bit of a juxtaposition. We have great tragedy with death. We have tragedy with economic impact to people and loss of incomes. But at the same time, you have to have hope for the future and think about what you're building towards, because that brings people opportunities as well, whether they're employed today or not, or recovering from a personal family situation. I think that's important for leaders, technical or business, to continue to, of course, we're thinking about how we continue and move into the future, but communicate that with people and let them know they're part of that journey and that future.
Indeed.
Great. Well, thank you, Dan. It's been great to talk with you.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you, Mitch.
You bet.
SecurityBoulevard.com is the leading resource for news, analysis, and education on challenges facing the cybersecurity industry. SecurityBoulevard.com covers all aspects of cybersecurity, including data security, DevSecOps, cloud security, application security, network security, security threats, and more. SecurityBoulevard.com has the largest selection of security content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.securityboulevard.com to learn more. SecurityBoulevard.com, home of Security Bloggers Network.
All righty. Thanks, Mitch. Thanks to John Willis, as always, making Tuesdays happen here on TechStrong TV. Thanks to all our guests for appearing and sharing. And thanks most of all to you, people watching and viewing this. We've been getting some great feedback from people on the Slack channel, in chat, in email. We appreciate the comments, and we appreciate your support. And we hope what we're doing is making your days a little better, a little easier, a little more informed. And we'll keep doing it. So we'll be back tomorrow with another great show. But for now, this is Alan Schimmel for TechStrong TV. And we're here's hoping that you're healthy, well, and strong. TechStrong.